The concept of Satan did not emerge fully formed from a single source, but rather coalesced over centuries from multiple religious and cultural tributaries. To understand Satanism in any of its modern manifestations, one must first trace the lineage of the adversary figure itself, a being whose name would come to represent opposition, rebellion, and the shadow side of human consciousness. The story begins not in darkness, but in the ancient light of civilizations that predated Christianity by thousands of years, where the seeds of dualism first took root in human imagination. In the ancient Near East, long before the Satan of Christian theology emerged, cultures grappled with the problem of evil through various theological frameworks. The Zoroastrian tradition of Persia, which flourished from approximately 1500 BCE onward, introduced a cosmological dualism that would profoundly influence later religious thought. Ahura Mazda, the wise lord and supreme deity, stood in eternal opposition to Angra Mainyu, also called Ahriman, the destructive spirit. This was not a battle between equals, but rather a cosmic struggle in which the forces of light would ultimately triumph over darkness. Yet the very existence of this oppositional force, this principle of destruction and chaos, established a template that would echo through subsequent religious traditions. The Zoroastrian influence cannot be overstated when examining the development of the Satan figure. During the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE, Jewish religious leaders encountered Persian Zoroastrianism firsthand, and scholars have long debated the extent to which this exposure shaped evolving Jewish angelology and demonology. Prior to this period, the Hebrew Bible contains remarkably few references to a personified evil entity. The adversary, when it appears, functions more as a role than as a being, a title rather than a name. In the book of Job, perhaps one of the oldest texts in the Hebrew Bible, the Satan appears as a member of the divine council, literally the Satan, meaning the accuser or the adversary. And this figure operates with divine permission, serving as a kind of prosecuting attorney in the heavenly court. He challenges Job's righteousness, suggesting that Job's devotion to God stems from material blessing rather than genuine faith. Crucially, this Satan acts under God's authority, operating within the bounds of divine will. There is no sense of cosmic rebellion, no war in heaven, no fallen angel consumed by pride. The Satan of Job functions as an instrument of divine testing, adversarial but not evil in the absolute sense that would later characterize Christian understanding. Similarly, in the book of Zechariah, the Satan appears again as the accuser, standing to oppose the high priest Joshua, but is rebuked by an angel of the Lord. Even here, the adversary functions within a divine framework, not as an independent force of evil. The evolution from this role-playing accuser to the cosmic antagonist of later tradition represents one of the most significant theological transformations in Western religious history. The transformation accelerated during the Second Temple period, roughly from 516 BCE to 70 CE, when Jewish thought underwent considerable development and diversification. Apocryphal texts, not included in the canonical Hebrew Bible but influential nonetheless, began to elaborate on the nature and origin of evil. The Book of Enoch, probably compiled between the 3rd and 1st centuries BCE, introduces the story of the Watchers, angels who descended to earth, mated with human women, and taught humanity forbidden knowledge. Their leader, variously named Semjaza or Azazel in different traditions, becomes a prototype for the fallen angel narrative. This mythology provided an origin story for evil that would prove enormously influential. Evil entered the world not through divine creation, but through angelic rebellion and disobedience. The Watchers brought corruption, violence, and forbidden arts to humanity. They violated the proper order of creation, crossing boundaries that should have remained inviolate. In this narrative framework, wickedness has a genealogy, a moment of origin, and a cast of supernatural perpetrators. the echoes of this story would reverberate through Christian demonology for millennia. As Christianity emerged from its Jewish roots, it inherited and transformed these concepts. The New Testament contains numerous references to Satan, now decisively characterized as the enemy of God and humanity. In the Gospels, Satan tempts Jesus in the wilderness, tests his resolve, and offers him earthly kingdoms in exchange for worship. This scene crystallizes the adversarial relationship, Satan positioned as the tempter who seeks to divert humanity from divine purpose. The devil, another name for this entity derived from the Greek diabolos meaning slanderer, becomes synonymous with evil itself. The Book of Revelation, probably written near the end of the 1st century CE, provides the most dramatic and influential account of Satanic mythology in Christian scripture. Here, a great dragon, identified as that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray, wages war against the archangel Michael and his angels, defeated, the dragon and his followers are cast out of heaven to earth. This war in heaven, this cosmic rebellion, became the foundational myth explaining the origin of Satan and the demonic forces arrayed against divine order. The imagery proved extraordinarily powerful, providing generations of Christians with a vivid narrative of supernatural conflict. Early Christian theologians elaborated on these scriptural foundations, constructing increasingly complex systems of demonology. The Church Fathers, writing in the 1st centuries after Christ, debated the nature of evil, the origins of demons, and the mechanisms by which Satan exerts influence over humanity. Origen, writing in the 3rd century, proposed that Satan, originally named Lucifer meaning light-bearer, fell through pride, consumed by the desire to elevate himself to equality with God. This interpretation, drawing on a passage in Isaiah originally referring to the king of Babylon, transformed a political taunt into cosmic history. Augustine of Hippo, perhaps the most influential early Christian theologian, developed a sophisticated understanding of evil as privation, the absence of good rather than a substance in itself. Yet he also affirmed the reality of Satan as a personal being, a fallen angel whose rebellion introduced moral evil into creation. Augustine's synthesis of Platonic philosophy and Christian theology shaped Western thought for centuries, establishing frameworks within which Satan would be understood not merely as a mythological figure, but as a real spiritual entity actively working to corrupt souls. As Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire and beyond, it encountered numerous pagan traditions with their own pantheons of gods and spirits. The early church faced a practical problem: how to deal with the gods worshipped by newly converted populations. The solution, employed with remarkable consistency across different regions and cultures, involved demonization in the most literal sense. The gods of the old religions were not dismissed as fictions, but rather reinterpreted as demons, fallen angels who had deceived humanity into false worship. This process transformed the religious landscape of Europe and the Mediterranean world. Pan, the Greek god of wild nature with his goat legs and horns, became a template for visual depictions of demons and eventually Satan himself. The horned god of Celtic tradition, the fertility deities of Germanic tribes, the various spirits and supernatural entities that populated pre-Christian Europe, all were systematically incorporated into Christian demonology as malevolent forces. This was not merely theological imperialism, but represented a genuine belief among early Christians that the old gods were demons in disguise, supernatural entities that existed but served evil purposes. The iconography of Satan began to take recognizable form during the medieval period, drawing on these various sources. Horns, hooves, a tail, wings, and often a grotesque or bestial appearance characterized artistic depictions. These features synthesized elements from classical mythology, biblical description, and pure imagination. The devil became a visual presence in churches, manuscripts, and popular art, a reminder of the supernatural danger that surrounded Christian souls. Every rendering reinforced the association between Satan and the animal realm, the body, the earth, positioning him in opposition to the spiritual, the heavenly, the transcendent. The demonization of pagan deities had profound consequences for how Satan would be understood in centuries to come. It established a pattern in which anything outside Christian orthodoxy could be framed as satanic, a tool of the adversary designed to lead souls astray. It also meant that certain symbols, practices, and ideas inherited from pre-Christian cultures carried demonic associations. The pentagram, once a symbol of harmony and protection, would in time become associated with evil. Natural magic, herbalism, and folk practices that predated Christianity could be reframed as diabolical arts. This early period also established the theological necessity of Satan within Christian cosmology. If God is omnipotent and benevolent, how does evil exist? Satan provided an answer, a being who exercised free will to choose rebellion, introducing moral evil into creation without implicating God directly. Human beings, likewise endowed with free will, faced constant temptation from this adversary. The drama of salvation unfolded against the backdrop of cosmic war between divine and demonic forces, with each soul a contested territory. The concept of hell as Satan's domain also developed during this period, though its full elaboration would come later. Early Christianity inherited various Jewish concepts of the afterlife, including Sheol, a shadowy underworld where the dead resided. The New Testament introduced Gehenna, named after a valley outside Jerusalem associated with fire and refuse, as a place of punishment. Over time, these concepts merged and expanded into a fully realized hell, a place of eternal torment ruled by Satan and populated by demons. This underworld became a crucial element in Christian teaching about the consequences of sin and the reality of divine judgment. The adversary's role as tempter placed extraordinary emphasis on human vulnerability to supernatural deception. If Satan and his demons actively sought to corrupt souls, then vigilance became a spiritual necessity. The Church positioned itself as the primary defense against diabolical influence, offering sacraments, teachings, and institutional authority as protection. This dynamic would have far-reaching implications for the development of church power and the persecution of those accused of trafficking with demons. By the end of the first millennium CE, Satan had been transformed from the ambiguous accuser of the Book of Job into a fully realized cosmic villain, the fallen angel whose pride led to eternal damnation, the tempter who stalks humanity, the ruler of hell, and the enemy of all that is holy. This transformation drew on Persian dualism, Jewish angelology, New Testament scripture, patristic theology, and the demonization of pagan deities. The Satan that emerged from this long process of development would haunt the Christian imagination for the next 1,000 years, becoming the dark mirror against which Christian identity defined itself, the shadow that gave shape to the light. The medieval period witnessed an extraordinary flowering of satanic imagery and theology, as the figure of the devil became increasingly central to Christian consciousness. This era, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th centuries, saw Satan transformed from a theological concept into a vivid presence that permeated every aspect of religious and social life. The adversary became more than an abstract force, evolving into a personality with motives, methods, and an army of demons working ceaselessly to claim human souls. The Church, consolidating its power across Europe, simultaneously elaborated its demonology and intensified its efforts to identify and eliminate those who might serve the devil's purposes. Medieval theologians devoted enormous intellectual energy to understanding the nature and operations of demonic forces. Thomas Aquinas, the 13th century Dominican friar, whose Summa Theologica became foundational to Catholic theology, addressed questions about demons with the same systematic rigor he applied to discussions of divine nature. Could demons reproduce? How did they tempt humanity? What powers did they possess and what limitations constrained them? Aquinas argued that demons were fallen angels who retained their angelic intelligence and certain supernatural abilities, but were irrevocably committed to evil. They could influence human imagination and senses, working through natural means to achieve supernatural ends, but they could not violate human free will directly. This scholastic approach to demonology might seem abstract, but it had concrete implications. If demons operated according to certain rules and possessed specific capabilities, then their activity could be identified, studied, and countered. The elaboration of demonological theory provided a framework for understanding misfortune, illness, temptation, and social disorder as potentially demonic in origin. When crops failed, when plague struck, when individuals behaved in unusual or disturbing ways, demonic interference offered an explanation that made sense within the medieval worldview. The visual culture of medieval Christianity reinforced the reality of Satan at every turn. Churches displayed intricate carvings and paintings depicting the Last Judgment, with Christ enthroned in glory, while demons dragged the damned into the gaping mouth of hell. These images served pedagogical purposes for a largely illiterate population, teaching through visual narrative the consequences of sin and the reality of supernatural danger. The devil appeared as a constant presence, sometimes terrifying, sometimes almost comical in his grotesqueness, but always present as a reminder that the world was a battleground between salvation and damnation. Mystery plays and morality plays, popular forms of medieval entertainment and religious instruction, brought these cosmic dramas to life. Actors portraying devils capered and menaced, tempting humanity and dragging sinners to perdition. The character of the vice, a stock figure in morality plays, embodied sin and temptation, often working in league with Satan to corrupt the protagonist. These theatrical traditions made the spiritual warfare described by theologians tangible and immediate, transforming abstract doctrine into lived experience for audiences throughout Christendom. Yet alongside official church teaching, a more sinister narrative began to emerge. The belief that some individuals actively worshipped Satan, entering into pacts with the devil and serving his purposes through malevolent magic. This concept of diabolical conspiracy would have catastrophic consequences, leading to centuries of persecution and violence. The roots of this belief system lay partly in the Church's struggle against heresy, groups whose theological positions deviated from Catholic orthodoxy, and who therefore represented both spiritual and institutional threats. The Cathars, also known as Albigensians, flourished in southern France during the 12th and 13th centuries, preaching a dualistic theology that bore striking similarities to ancient Gnostic beliefs. They taught that the material world was created by an evil deity, that the physical body was a prison for the spirit, and that the God of the Old Testament was not the true divine being, but rather a malevolent creator. To Orthodox Christians, this theology was not merely incorrect, but diabolical. If the Cathars believed the material world was evil, did this not mean they served the forces of darkness? If they rejected the Church's sacraments and authority, were they not in league with Satan? The Church's response to the Cathar heresy was swift and brutal. Pope Innocent III launched the Albigensian Crusade in 1209, a military campaign that devastated the Languedoc region. The famous command reportedly given at the siege of Béziers, "Kill them all, God will know his own," captures the ferocity with which the Church pursued those it deemed heretics. Tens of thousands died in the conflict, and Cathar communities were effectively destroyed. But the Crusade established a precedent. Those who deviated from Catholic orthodoxy were not simply wrong, they were dangerous, agents of Satan who threatened the entire social and spiritual order. The persecution of the Cathars demonstrated that the Church was willing to use extreme violence against supposed servants of the devil. It also revealed how easily theological disagreement could be reframed as diabolical conspiracy. The Cathars did not worship Satan. Indeed, they had their own complex theology and ethical system. But in the binary logic of medieval Christianity, anything opposed to God must serve Satan, and those who rejected church teaching must be in league with demonic forces. The formal machinery of persecution became institutionalized with the establishment of the Inquisition. Pope Gregory IX created the Papal Inquisition in 1231, charged with identifying and eliminating heresy. Dominican friars, ironically called Hounds of the Lord, became the primary inquisitors, traveling throughout Europe to investigate accusations of false belief. The Inquisition developed sophisticated procedures for interrogation, judgment, and punishment. Suspected heretics faced examination by trained theologians who probed their beliefs, seeking signs of doctrinal deviation. Those found guilty might be required to perform penance, but persistent or serious heresy could result in imprisonment or execution, with burning at the stake becoming the most common method for executing heretics. The Inquisition's procedures included the use of torture to extract confessions, a practice formally authorized by Pope Innocent IV in 1252. Torture transformed accusation into confirmation, as few could withstand the physical anguish of the strappado, the rack, or other devices employed by inquisitors. Under such duress, the accused might confess to anything, including things they had not done, beliefs they did not hold, and practices they had never performed. This dynamic would prove crucial when the focus of persecution shifted from heresy to witchcraft. The concept of witchcraft as devil worship emerged gradually during the late medieval period. Folk magic had existed throughout Christian Europe, a continuation of pre-Christian practices adapted to the new religious context. Cunning folk, wise women, and local healers employed charms, herbs, and rituals to address practical problems, healing illness, protecting livestock, ensuring fertility, finding lost objects. These practices existed in a grey area, neither fully endorsed nor completely condemned by the Church. But as demonological theory became more elaborate and the machinery of persecution more developed, folk magic began to be reinterpreted as diabolical in nature. The crucial innovation was the idea of the demonic pact. Theologians and inquisitors developed the theory that witches gained their powers through explicit agreements with Satan. In exchange for supernatural abilities, the witch pledged allegiance to the devil, renouncing Christianity and agreeing to serve demonic purposes. This concept transformed witchcraft from a collection of folk practices into a heresy, indeed, the ultimate heresy, a conscious decision to worship Satan instead of God. The elaboration of witch mythology accelerated in the 14th and 15th centuries. Inquisitors began to extract confessions describing elaborate ceremonies in which witches gathered to worship the devil. These supposed witches' Sabbaths involved flying through the air to remote locations, often on broomsticks or animal backs. Upon arrival, they would participate in obscene rituals, kissing the devil's posterior, dancing in circles, feasting on the flesh of unbaptized infants, engaging in sexual orgies with demons. The Sabbath represented an inversion of Christian worship, a black mass in which everything holy was profaned and everything forbidden was celebrated. These confessions, obtained through torture and leading questions, bore striking similarities across different regions and time periods, not because they described real events, but because inquisitors operated from a shared template of what devil worship should look like. The consistency of confessions actually resulted from the consistency of interrogation techniques and presuppositions. Inquisitors knew what they expected to find, and their methods ensured they found it. The publication of witch-hunting manuals codified and spread these beliefs. The most infamous of these texts, the Malleus Maleficarum, or Hammer of Witches, appeared in 1486, authored by the German inquisitors Heinrich Kramer and Jakob Sprenger. This comprehensive guide to identifying, interrogating, and prosecuting witches went through numerous editions and became extraordinarily influential. The Malleus Maleficarum argued that witchcraft was real, dangerous, and predominantly practiced by women who were supposedly more susceptible to demonic influence due to their weaker nature and greater carnality. The text provided detailed instructions for every aspect of witch prosecution. It explained how to identify potential witches through physical marks supposedly left by demons. It described proper interrogation techniques, including the use of torture. It outlined the theology of devil worship and the mechanisms by which demons granted powers to their human servants. The Malleus Maleficarum gave institutional legitimacy and intellectual sophistication to witch hunting, transforming folk superstition and clerical paranoia into a systematic campaign of persecution. The late medieval period also saw the emergence of accusations involving specific forms of diabolical magic. Necromancy, the summoning of spirits to gain knowledge or power, was condemned as inherently demonic. Grimoires, books of magical instruction, circulated despite church prohibition, containing rituals for summoning demons and compelling them to serve human purposes. The Key of Solomon, the Lesser Key of Solomon, and numerous other texts described elaborate ceremonies involving magic circles, incantations, and offerings designed to call forth supernatural entities. These grimoires reveal a complex relationship between magic and religion. The rituals they describe often invoked Christian prayers, used Hebrew names of God, and required the magician to be in a state of ritual purity. The magical tradition, at least in its learned forms, did not reject Christianity, but rather sought to harness spiritual forces through understanding of cosmic hierarchies. Yet the Church viewed any attempt to command demons as inherently diabolical, a usurpation of divine authority, and a dangerous trafficking with evil. The persecution of supposed Satanists during the medieval period stemmed from genuine belief in the reality of demonic threat. Inquisitors were not cynics. They sincerely believed they were protecting Christian society from a vast conspiracy of devil worshippers. The confessions they extracted confirmed their worst fears, creating a feedback loop in which belief in satanic conspiracy generated evidence of satanic conspiracy. The fact that this evidence was manufactured through torture did not diminish its power to convince. This era established patterns that would persist for centuries. The idea that Satan's servants gathered in secret to perform obscene rites, that they could be identified through careful investigation, that they deserved the harshest punishment, these notions became deeply embedded in European consciousness. The Inquisition developed procedures and created precedents that would be employed in later witch hunts. The demonological theories elaborated by medieval theologians provided the intellectual framework for understanding witchcraft as a vast diabolical conspiracy. The medieval construction of Satan and Satanism represented a profound expansion of earlier concepts. The adversary was no longer merely a tempter, but the leader of an organized army of demons and human servants. Devil worship was not a theological possibility, but a present danger, enacted by real people who had betrayed their faith and humanity. The cosmos was a battlefield, and vigilance against demonic infiltration required constant effort. This worldview, fully developed by the end of the Middle Ages, set the stage for the explosion of witch trials that would mark the early modern period, as the hunt for Satan's servants intensified into one of history's darkest chapters. The witch hunts that swept across Europe and colonial America between roughly 1450 and 1750 represent one of history's most sustained campaigns of persecution, resulting in the execution of tens of thousands of people accused of serving Satan. These trials intensified the medieval association between witchcraft and devil worship, transforming theoretical demonology into practical terror. The witch hunts were not uniform across geography or time, varying significantly in intensity and character from region to region, but they shared common features: a belief in diabolical conspiracy, reliance on torture to extract confessions, and a judicial system increasingly oriented toward finding and destroying Satan's supposed servants. The scale of the witch hunts remains difficult to determine with precision, as records are incomplete and varied widely in quality. Scholarly estimates suggest that somewhere between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft during this period, though the number of accusations far exceeded the number of executions. For every person burned at the stake, many others endured interrogation, imprisonment, torture, and exile. Communities throughout Europe lived under the shadow of accusation, where a neighbor's jealousy or an unexplained misfortune could trigger investigations that destroyed lives and families. The hunts peaked during the 16th and 17th centuries, coinciding with the religious upheavals of the Protestant Reformation and Catholic Counter-Reformation. Both Protestant and Catholic authorities pursued witches with equal fervor, united in their belief that Satan's forces threatened Christian society. Martin Luther spoke of the devil as a constant presence, a personal adversary with whom he felt himself in perpetual struggle. John Calvin likewise affirmed the reality of demonic activity and supported the prosecution of witches. The religious fracturing of Europe did not diminish belief in satanic conspiracy, but rather intensified it as each faction saw diabolical influence in the actions of their opponents. The mechanics of witch trials followed patterns established by the Inquisition, but adapted to local legal systems. Accusations typically began at the community level, emerging from interpersonal conflicts, unexplained illnesses, crop failures, or other misfortunes attributed to malevolent magic. Once suspicion focused on an individual, formal investigation commenced. The accused would be arrested and subjected to interrogation, often under torture, to extract a confession. The confession typically followed a standard narrative framework. The accused admitted to making a pact with Satan, attending Sabbaths, performing harmful magic, and other crimes associated with devil worship. The use of torture in extracting these confessions cannot be overstated in understanding how the witch hunt narrative perpetuated itself. Torture was not merely incidental but central to the entire process. The strappado, in which the victim was suspended by the wrists tied behind the back, the thumbscrews, the rack, the swimming test, and numerous other techniques were employed to break the will of the accused. Under such torment, people confessed to anything their interrogators suggested. They named accomplices, implicating others in the diabolical conspiracy. These denunciations led to further arrests, creating cascades of accusation that could devastate entire communities. The confessions obtained through torture revealed an elaborate mythology of devil worship that remained remarkably consistent across different regions. Accused witches described traveling to remote locations for Sabbath gatherings, sometimes flying through the air after anointing themselves with special ointments. They told of meeting the devil, who appeared in various forms, as a black goat, as a well-dressed gentleman, as a monstrous being with horns and cloven hooves. They confessed to renouncing their baptism, pledging allegiance to Satan, and receiving a mark somewhere on their body where the devil had touched them, leaving an insensitive spot that would not bleed when pricked. The Sabbath itself was described in terms that inverted Christian worship. Where Christians gathered on Sunday in consecrated churches to celebrate the Eucharist and honor God, witches supposedly gathered on Friday nights in deserted places to perform obscene parodies of religious rites. They kissed the devil's posterior as an act of homage. They participated in feasts featuring disgusting food. They danced in circles moving counterclockwise. They engaged in indiscriminate sexual activity with demons and with each other. They sacrificed infants, sometimes their own children, cooking and consuming their flesh or rendering their fat into magical ointments. These lurid details reflected deep anxieties about social order, sexuality, and religious authority. The witches' Sabbath represented everything Christianity opposed: sacrilege instead of sanctity, chaos instead of order, animalistic sexuality instead of controlled reproduction, the consumption of human flesh instead of proper community, the supposed practices of witches inverted every social and religious norm, creating a dark mirror image of Christian society. In the witch, authorities found the ultimate outsider, the person who had rejected not merely specific doctrines, but the entire foundation of civilization. The sexual component of witch mythology deserves particular attention, as it reveals the deeply gendered nature of witch persecution. Women constituted the majority of those accused and executed for witchcraft, estimates generally ranging from 70 to 80% of all victims. The reasons for this gender disparity were complex, rooted in theological, social, and economic factors. Medieval and early modern theology characterized women as more susceptible to demonic influence, supposedly weaker in reason and stronger in carnal appetite. The Malleus Maleficarum explicitly argued that women's nature made them ideal targets for Satan's recruitment. Accusations often targeted women who existed outside or on the margins of patriarchal structures. Widows, unmarried women, healers and midwives, those who were argumentative or independent. Women whose behavior challenged social norms, who spoke too freely, who disputed with neighbors, who practiced folk medicine, all faced increased risk of accusation. The witch trials served to enforce social conformity, punishing those whose existence or actions threatened established hierarchies. An older woman who begged for charity and then cursed those who refused her might be accused of causing subsequent misfortunes through malevolent magic. The diabolical pact, central to the crime of witchcraft, often contained explicitly sexual elements. Witches supposedly consummated their agreement with Satan through sexual intercourse with him or with demons acting as his proxies. Demons called incubi allegedly had sexual relations with women, while succubi did the same with men. These demonic sexual encounters were described in confessions with disturbing specificity, including details about the physical nature of demons, the coldness of their bodies, and the pain or pleasure involved. The theological implications were complex. Did demons have bodies? Could such unions produce offspring? How did these encounters relate to concepts of sin and corruption? The folk practices of cunning folk and village healers, predominantly women, became reinterpreted through the lens of diabolical conspiracy. Herbal remedies, protective charms, love potions, and divination techniques that had been tolerated for centuries suddenly appeared as evidence of demonic pacts. The midwife, who attended at the most vulnerable moments of life and death, who possessed knowledge of the female body and its mysteries, who sometimes presided over stillbirths and infant deaths, became a particularly suspect figure. Accusations suggested midwives killed babies to use their remains in demonic rituals or offered newborns to Satan. The witch hunts reached their most intense phase in certain regions of the Holy Roman Empire, particularly in the prince-bishoprics of Würzburg and Bamberg, where prince-bishops pursued witches with exceptional zeal. In Würzburg, between 1626 and 1631, approximately 900 people were executed for witchcraft. These campaigns expanded beyond the usual suspects to include members of the elite, merchants, civic officials, even clergy found themselves accused and executed. The hunt developed its own momentum, with each confession producing new accusations, the circle of suspicion expanding until no one felt safe. The trials in Bamberg similarly spiraled into mass persecution, with the prince-bishop ordering the construction of a special witch house to accommodate the large number of accused. The interrogation chambers featured equipment specifically designed for extracting confessions through torture. Records from these trials reveal the arbitrary nature of the accusations and the inevitability of confession once torture began. Entire families were destroyed, their property confiscated by the state, creating economic incentives for continued persecution alongside ideological motivations. Witch hunting crossed the Atlantic with European colonization, taking root in the New World with particular intensity in Puritan New England. The Salem witch trials of 1692 in Massachusetts represent the most famous American example, though hardly the only one. Salem's outbreak began with several young girls exhibiting strange behaviors, convulsions, unintelligible speech, contortions, and complaints of being bitten and pinched by invisible forces. Village physician William Griggs could find no natural explanation and suggested supernatural causes. The accusation began with social outsiders, Tituba, an enslaved woman from Barbados, Sarah Good, a homeless beggar, and Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman who had scandalized the community by cohabiting with a man before marriage. Under interrogation, Tituba confessed to signing the Devil's Book and described seeing other names written in it, though she could not identify them. Her confession, likely motivated by fear and possibly influenced by leading questions, confirmed the worst fears of Salem's authorities. A diabolical conspiracy existed in their midst. The accusations spread rapidly through the small community. Hundreds were accused, dozens imprisoned, and 19 people were hanged. One man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death under heavy stones for refusing to enter a plea. The Salem trials demonstrated how quickly witch hunt hysteria could consume a community. Neighbors accused neighbors, family members turned against each other, and long-standing grudges found expression in diabolical accusations. The spectral evidence accepted by the court, testimony that the accused spirit or spectre had appeared to the witness and caused harm, made defense nearly impossible. What finally ended the Salem trials was not a sudden loss of belief in witchcraft, but rather growing concern about the judicial procedures and the expanding circle of accusations. When respected members of the community, including the wife of the governor, came under suspicion, authorities began to question whether the trials had gone too far. The Massachusetts General Court eventually ruled that spectral evidence was insufficient for conviction, effectively ending the prosecutions. In subsequent years, some of the judges and accusers expressed regret, though this provided little comfort to the families of those executed. The broader witch hunts in Europe began to decline in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, though the process was gradual and uneven. Several factors contributed to this decline. The emergence of more rigorous legal standards made it harder to convict based solely on tortured confessions. The rise of scientific thinking provided natural explanations for phenomena previously attributed to supernatural causes. Enlightenment philosophers criticized witch beliefs as superstitious and the trials as judicial murders. Religious authorities themselves became increasingly skeptical, some arguing that crediting witches with significant power actually diminished divine sovereignty. Yet the decline in witch trials did not represent a sudden rejection of belief in Satan or his influence. Rather, educated opinion shifted away from the idea that Satan worked primarily through human agents who could be identified and executed. The devil remained real, but the diabolical conspiracy of witches increasingly appeared implausible. This gradual evolution of thought marked the beginning of modern skepticism toward claims of devil worship, though it would be centuries before such skepticism became universal. The legacy of the witch hunts profoundly shaped perceptions of Satanism for generations. The mythology developed during this period, the lurid details of Sabbaths and diabolical pacts, the association of witchcraft with female sexuality and social deviance, the image of Satan as leader of an organized conspiracy against Christian society, all these elements became deeply embedded in Western consciousness. When Satanism later emerged as an actual religious movement, it would operate in the shadow of these historical persecutions, inheriting both the imagery and the legacy of fear and persecution that centuries of witch hunting had created. The transformation of Satan from object of terror to symbol of rebellion began in literature, as poets and novelists of the 17th and 18th centuries reimagined the adversary in ways that deviated dramatically from orthodox theological interpretation. This literary evolution would prove crucial to the eventual emergence of philosophical Satanism, providing intellectual and aesthetic foundations for viewing Satan not as evil incarnate, but as a complex figure representing resistance to tyranny, the pursuit of knowledge, and the assertion of individual will against oppressive authority. The Satan who emerged from these literary reimaginings bore little resemblance to the grotesque demon of medieval imagination or the conspirator of witch trial confessions. John Milton's Paradise Lost, published in 1667, stands as the pivotal text in this transformation. Milton, a Puritan who had supported Oliver Cromwell's Commonwealth and written defences of regicide and press freedom, undertook to justify the ways of God to humanity through an epic retelling of the fall. His stated purpose was orthodox, to affirm divine justice and explain how evil entered the world through angelic rebellion and human disobedience. Yet the poem Milton produced contained profound ambiguities that would reverberate through centuries of subsequent interpretation. Milton's Satan possesses a grandeur and complexity that overshadows every other character in the poem. When readers first encounter him, he lies chained on a lake of fire in hell, defeated but unbroken, his spirit intact despite his physical degradation. His opening soliloquy reveals a being of tremendous will and pride, refusing to submit even after catastrophic defeat. The famous lines capture this defiant spirit. "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. The mind can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven." This Satan displays courage, eloquence, and determination. He rallies his fallen followers, organizes them into an army, and conceives a plan to strike at God through corrupting humanity. The energy and charisma Milton invests in Satan creates what critics have called the poem's central problem. Readers throughout the centuries have found Satan the most compelling character, his speeches the most powerful poetry, his rebellion the most dramatically engaging element of the narrative. God, in contrast, speaks in theological abstractions. The Son demonstrates obedience rather than complexity. Adam and Eve possess innocence, but lack the grandeur of Satan's defiance. Milton's technical skill as a poet seems most fully engaged when writing Satan's perspective, creating a character who commands attention and even sympathy despite his supposed villainy. The Romantic poets of the late 18th and early 19th centuries embraced Milton's Satan enthusiastically, interpreting him as a heroic rebel rather than a villain. William Blake declared that Milton was of the devil's party without knowing it, suggesting that the poet's imagination had betrayed his conscious theology. Blake's own mythology featured a complex cosmology in which figures of authority and restriction, including his character, Urizen representing reason and law, played ambiguous roles. Blake rejected conventional morality and organized religion, seeking instead a personal spiritual vision that honored imagination and desire. In this framework, the Miltonic Satan appeared not as evil, but as a symbol of energy and rebellion against unjust constraint. Percy Bysshe Shelley made the argument explicit in his preface to Prometheus Unbound, declaring Satan the moral superior of Milton's God. Shelley, an avowed atheist who had been expelled from Oxford for publishing a pamphlet on the necessity of atheism, saw in Satan a champion of liberty opposing a cosmic tyrant. The equation was clear in Shelley's radical politics. Satan represented revolution, the overthrow of unjust power, the refusal to submit to arbitrary authority. God represented monarchy, tradition, and oppressive social order. To sympathize with Satan was to align oneself with progress and freedom against reaction and tyranny. Lord Byron, whose personal life scandalized conventional society and whose poetry celebrated passion and transgression, likewise identified with the satanic rebel. His dramatic poem Cain reimagined the first murderer as a questioning figure who refused to accept divine authority uncritically. Lucifer appears as Cain's interlocutor, offering knowledge and encouraging independence of thought. Byron's Lucifer is sophisticated and seductive, a bringer of enlightenment rather than corruption. The poem scandalized religious authorities precisely because it made rebellion appear noble and questioning appear virtuous rather than sinful. This romantic appropriation of Satan transformed the adversary into a symbol with multiple resonant meanings. Satan represented the rebel against tyranny, appealing to political radicals who opposed monarchy and advocated for republican government or even revolution. He embodied the pursuit of forbidden knowledge, attractive to those who valued science and reason over faith and tradition. He symbolized individual will asserting itself against social conformity, speaking to those who chafed under restrictive moral codes. He embodied passion and desire in opposition to repression and denial, appealing to those who rejected ascetic Christianity's suspicion of the body and sexuality. The romantic Satan was not evil but misunderstood, not a tempter but a liberator. The romantics inverted traditional Christian valuation. What Christianity called virtue appeared as submission. What Christianity called vice appeared as vitality. Pride became self-respect. Disobedience became independence. Rebellion became heroism. This revaluation did not require literal belief in Satan as a supernatural entity. Rather, Satan functioned as a mythological figure, a character whose story could be interpreted symbolically to express philosophical and political positions. Gothic literature of the same period explored Satan and demonic themes from a different angle, emphasizing horror, transgression, and the allure of the forbidden. Gothic novels like Matthew Lewis's The Monk featured demonic pacts, supernatural evil, and the corruption of virtue. These works did not celebrate Satan, but rather explored the psychological territory where desire and dread intersected. The Gothic Satan was dangerous and seductive, offering power and pleasure but ultimately destroying those who accepted his bargain. Gothic literature maintained the traditional view of Satan as evil while recognizing his compelling attraction. The tension between romantic heroic Satan and Gothic destructive Satan would persist in cultural representations for centuries. These dual images coexisted sometimes in the same work, reflecting ambivalence about rebellion, desire, and transgression. Satan could be both hero and villain, liberator and destroyer, depending on perspective and context. This multiplicity made the figure extraordinarily flexible as a cultural symbol, adaptable to various artistic and philosophical purposes. The 19th century witnessed an explosion of occult revival in Europe and America, as interest in magic, spiritualism, and esoteric religion flourished alongside and sometimes in reaction to industrial modernity and scientific materialism. While much of this occult revival focused on themes of enlightenment and spiritual evolution rather than diabolical magic, it created a cultural context in which alternative religious movements could flourish. Secret societies, magical orders, and esoteric teachers proliferated, offering initiates access to hidden knowledge and spiritual transformation. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded in 1888, became one of the most influential magical organizations of this period. The Golden Dawn synthesized various esoteric traditions including Kabbalah, alchemy, astrology, tarot, and ceremonial magic into a comprehensive system of spiritual development. Members progressed through grades of initiation, learning increasingly advanced magical techniques and encountering increasingly profound mysteries. The order attracted artists, writers, and intellectuals, including W.B. Yeats, who found in its teachings an alternative to both Christian orthodoxy and materialist philosophy. The Golden Dawn's magic was not satanic in the traditional sense. The order's teachings emphasized spiritual evolution, contact with divine forces, and the transformation of consciousness rather than diabolical pacts or malevolent sorcery. Yet the organization's willingness to engage with magical practice, to summon spiritual entities, and to pursue occult knowledge placed it outside and implicitly in opposition to mainstream Christianity. The Golden Dawn demonstrated that alternative spiritual paths could be elaborated systematically, taught to initiates, and practiced within structured organizational frameworks. Aleister Crowley, who joined the Golden Dawn in 1898, would take these occult traditions in directions that more directly engaged with diabolical imagery. Crowley, whose life and work deserve extensive treatment, developed a magical philosophy that celebrated the will, rejected conventional morality, and embraced transgression as a spiritual technique. His maxim, "Do what thou wilt," shall be the whole of the law, articulated a radical individualism that horrified conventional society. Crowley delighted in adopting titles like the Beast 1666 and the wickedest man in the world, cultivating a public image as a practitioner of dark magic. Crowley's actual philosophy, elaborated in texts like the Book of the Law and Magic in Theory and Practice, was more complex than his public persona suggested. Thelema, the magical religion he founded, taught that each individual possessed a true will, a unique purpose that should be discovered and pursued without regard to social convention or traditional morality. The pursuit of true will required magical training, the development of consciousness, and the overcoming of limitations imposed by culture and psychology. Sin, in Thelemic terms, meant acting contrary to one's true will, being false to one's authentic nature. Crowley's relationship to Satanism was ambiguous. He did not worship Satan in any conventional sense, not believing in the Christian devil as a literal entity. Yet he deliberately employed diabolical imagery, both to shock conventional sensibilities and to express his rejection of Christian values. His rituals incorporated elements from various magical traditions, including practices that mainstream society would consider blasphemous. He advocated for sexual liberation, experimented with drugs, and generally pursued a lifestyle designed to transgress every boundary of respectable behavior. The influence of Crowley and the broader occult revival on the development of modern Satanism cannot be overstated. These movements demonstrated that alternative religions could be created, that magical practice could be systematized, that rebellion against Christianity could take organized form. They provided a vocabulary and set of practices that later Satanists would adapt to their purposes. They established a counterculture in which unconventional spiritual beliefs and practices could find community and validation. French decadent literature of the late 19th century explored diabolical themes with particular intensity. Joris Karl Huysmans's novel, LaVey, published in 1891, depicted contemporary Satanism in France, describing black masses celebrated by defrocked priests and attended by aristocratic devil worshippers. Huysmans conducted research into historical and contemporary satanic practices, interviewing individuals who claimed to participate in such ceremonies. The novel's depiction of the Black Mass, an inverted parody of Catholic liturgy featuring desecration of the Eucharist and sexual obscenity, became enormously influential in shaping public perceptions of satanic practice. Whether the satanic groups Huysmans described actually existed in the form he depicted remains uncertain. Some scholars argue he documented real practices, while others suggest he largely invented or exaggerated scattered elements of anti-clericalism and sexual libertinism into a coherent diabolical movement. Regardless of historical accuracy, LaVey created a template for understanding modern Satanism as an underground religion practiced by sophisticates who deliberately inverted Christian ritual for purposes of transgression and pleasure. The Black Mass, as described in decadent literature and sensational journalism, became a powerful symbol of Satanism in popular imagination. The ceremony supposedly involved a naked woman serving as the altar, the ritual desecration of a consecrated host, prayers to Satan, and sexual acts performed as part of the liturgy. This image of satanic practice emphasized blasphemy, sexuality, and inversion of the sacred. It suggested that Satanism was not merely intellectual rebellion, but enacted transgression, ritual performance of sacrilege that shocked and titillated in equal measure. By the early 20th century, multiple cultural streams had converged to create new possibilities for Satanism. Literary tradition had reimagined Satan as rebel and hero. Occult revival had demonstrated that alternative religions could be systematically developed. Decadent literature had popularized images of contemporary satanic practice. Social changes, including urbanization, the decline of religious authority, and increasing individualism, created cultural space for unconventional beliefs. The stage was set for Satanism to emerge not as Christian fantasy or romantic metaphor, but as an actual religious movement embraced by real practitioners who would claim the label for themselves. The early 20th century witnessed a flourishing of occult movements that would lay crucial groundwork for the emergence of modern Satanism, even when these movements did not explicitly identify as satanic. These esoteric traditions shared certain characteristics: rejection of mainstream religious authority, emphasis on individual spiritual development, engagement with magical practice, and a willingness to explore what conventional society deemed forbidden or dangerous. The occult underground of this period created networks, developed techniques, and articulated philosophies that would profoundly influence later, explicitly satanic organizations. Aleister Crowley's Thelema represented perhaps the most significant of these precursor movements. After his departure from the Golden Dawn amid acrimony and power struggles, Crowley traveled extensively, studying yoga in India, exploring Buddhist meditation, and synthesizing various mystical traditions. In 1904, while in Cairo with his wife Rose, Crowley claimed to have received a communication from a supernatural entity named Aiwass, who dictated to him the Book of the Law. This brief text, consisting of 3 chapters, became the foundational scripture of Thelema. The Book of the Law proclaimed the dawning of a new aeon, superseding the previous aeon of Christianity. Where Christianity emphasized sacrifice, humility, and submission to divine will, the new aeon celebrated strength, pride, and the pursuit of individual will. The text's core teaching was expressed in several formulations. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, and love is the law, love under will. These phrases were not invitations to mere hedonism or anarchism, as Crowley's critics often claimed, but rather statements of a magical philosophy centered on discovering and manifesting one's true will. True will, in Thelemic teaching, represented an individual's deepest purpose and authentic nature, distinct from ego desires or social conditioning. Discovering true will required rigorous magical training, psychological self-examination, and often the guidance of those further advanced on the path. Once discovered, true will should be pursued without hesitation or compromise. Anything that interfered with or distracted from true will constituted sin or error. This radical focus on individual purpose elevated personal experience and judgment above external moral codes or religious authorities. Crowley's magical system drew on multiple traditions but synthesized them into something distinctly his own. He incorporated ceremonial magic from the Golden Dawn, yoga and meditation from Eastern traditions, Kabbalistic symbolism, tarot correspondences, astrology, and his own innovations. His magnum opus, Magic in Theory and Practice, published in 1929, provided comprehensive instruction in magical technique. The text covered ritual construction, the use of symbols and correspondences, meditation practices, invocation and evocation of spiritual entities, and the application of magical will to achieve specific results. Central to Crowley's system was the practice of sex magic, techniques that employed sexual energy and activity for magical purposes. This was not mere libertinism, though Crowley certainly engaged in sexual excess, but rather a sophisticated understanding of sexuality as a powerful force that could be harnessed and directed toward spiritual and magical ends. His teachings on sex magic remained partially veiled, revealed only to initiates of his magical order, the Ordo Templi Orientis, though rumors and scandals ensured that this aspect of his work received considerable public attention. The Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO, became the organizational vehicle for Thelema. Originally founded in Germany in the early 1900s as a quasi-Masonic magical order, the OTO was reorganized by Crowley after he became involved with the group. Under his leadership, it became explicitly Thelemic, with the Book of the Law at the center of its teachings. The order employed a degree system with initiates progressing through levels that corresponded to different stages of magical development. Higher degrees gained access to increasingly advanced teachings, particularly regarding sex magic. Crowley's influence on the development of modern Satanism was both direct and indirect. He never identified as a Satanist in any conventional sense, not worshipping Satan as a deity, yet his entire approach, his celebration of transgression, his rejection of Christian morality, his embrace of titles like the Beast, his deliberate courting of scandal, all these elements created a template that later Satanists would follow. More substantively, his magical philosophy demonstrated that one could systematically develop a religion based on individual will and rejecting traditional moral constraints. The left-hand path, a concept that would become central to Satanic philosophy, emerged from Western engagement with Eastern religious categories. In Hindu and Buddhist Tantra, the left-hand path referred to practices that deliberately employed things considered impure or forbidden, such as consumption of meat and alcohol, sexual activity, or meditation in cremation grounds. These transgressive practices were understood as shortcuts to enlightenment, ways of transcending conventional morality and dualistic thinking by directly confronting and integrating what society rejected. Western occultists adapted this concept, using left-hand path to describe magical and spiritual approaches that emphasized individual apotheosis over absorption into divine unity, that celebrated the self rather than seeking its dissolution, and that employed transgression and antinomianism as spiritual techniques. The left-hand path stood in contrast to the right-hand path, which sought union with the divine, subordination of individual will to cosmic harmony, and adherence to traditional moral frameworks. This dichotomy provided a useful way to categorize different approaches to occultism and would become crucial to how modern Satanists understood their practice. The concept of the left-hand path appealed to those who valued individuality, who resisted the idea that spiritual advancement required surrendering the self, and who saw conventional morality as arbitrary constraint rather than divine truth. It suggested that darkness, transgression, and even evil might serve as valid spiritual tools when consciously employed by those who understood their purpose. The left-hand path was not about random wickedness, but about intentional violation of taboos to achieve self-transformation and power. Kenneth Grant, a British occultist who studied with Crowley and later led his own branch of the OTO, developed the concept of the left-hand path further in his writings. Grant's work emphasized the darker aspects of Crowley's teachings, exploring connections between Thelema and various mythological and occult systems involving chthonic deities and forbidden knowledge. His books, including The Magical Revival and Cults of the Shadow, introduced readers to entities like Choronzon, a demon associated with the abyss in Kabbalistic cosmology, and explored magical systems involving forces that conventional occultism avoided. Grant's writings were often intentionally obscure, filled with cryptic references and complex symbolic systems. Yet they attracted readers interested in the more transgressive elements of occultism, those willing to explore what Grant called the night side of the Tree of Life, the Qliphoth or demonic inverse of the Sephiroth in Kabbalistic cosmology. While Grant did not identify as a Satanist, his work on the left-hand path and the magical use of supposedly dark forces influenced those who would later develop explicitly Satanic magical systems. Another crucial development in 20th century occultism was chaos magic, which emerged in Britain in the 1970s through the work of practitioners like Peter Carroll and Ray Sherwin. Chaos magic took a radically pragmatic approach to magical practice, arguing that belief itself was a tool that could be adopted and discarded as useful. Rather than committing to a single cosmology or pantheon, chaos magicians would use whatever symbolic system seemed most effective for a particular working, then set it aside. This approach represented a significant departure from traditional ceremonial magic, which required elaborate ritual, extensive study of correspondences, and often a lifetime commitment to a particular system. Chaos magic stripped away what it saw as unnecessary complications, focusing on results rather than tradition. The chaos magical attitude of instrumental belief, using symbols and entities as psychological tools, rather than accepting them as objective realities, would influence how some modern Satanists understood their practice. Austin Osman Spare, an artist and occultist active in the early 20th century, developed techniques that would later be incorporated into chaos magic and influence left-hand path practice. Spare's system of sigillization involved encoding desires into abstract symbols that could then be charged with magical intent and released into the unconscious mind to manifest results. His automatic drawing and trance states produced surreal, often disturbing artwork that explored the borderlands between consciousness and the unconscious, rationality and desire. Spare's philosophy emphasized the body and instinct over reason and social conditioning. He developed the concept of atavistic resurgence, deliberately tapping into primal or evolutionary memory to access power and vitality that civilized consciousness suppressed. His work celebrated sexuality, the grotesque, and the transgressive, finding spiritual potential in what conventional religion rejected. Though not a Satanist, Spare's approach to magic as antinomian practice and his celebration of dark or forbidden aspects of human nature anticipated elements of Satanic philosophy. The broader cultural context of the 20th century also created conditions favorable to the emergence of Satanism as an organized movement. 2 world wars and numerous smaller conflicts undermined optimistic narratives of progress and enlightenment. The horrors of industrial-scale violence, genocide, and nuclear threat raised profound questions about human nature and morality. Existentialist philosophy emphasized individual freedom and responsibility in a universe without inherent meaning. Psychoanalysis explored the dark recesses of the unconscious, revealing drives and desires that challenged Victorian assumptions about human nature. In this context, Satan as a symbol gained new resonance. The adversary represented not supernatural evil, but rather the shadow side of human nature, the aggression and desire that civilization sought to repress, but could never eliminate. Acknowledging and even embracing this shadow seemed more honest than pretending it did not exist. If humanity was capable of immense cruelty, if civilization was fragile and morality relative, if God was dead as Nietzsche had proclaimed, then perhaps the Satanic symbol captured something true about the human condition. Popular culture of the mid-20th century reflected growing interest in occultism and the darker aspects of spirituality. Films like Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist depicted satanic conspiracies and demonic possession, terrifying audiences but also making these themes part of mainstream discourse. Dennis Wheatley's occult thriller novels featuring black magic and devil worship became bestsellers. Even when these works took a horrified or condemnatory stance toward their subject matter, they familiarized audiences with occult concepts and imagery. The counterculture of the 1960s, with its emphasis on individual freedom, experimentation with altered consciousness, rejection of traditional authority, and interest in alternative spirituality, created a particularly fertile environment for unconventional religious movements. While much of the counterculture gravitated toward Eastern religions, New Age spirituality, and nature-based paganism, a small but significant number explored darker alternatives, the aesthetic of transgression, the celebration of excess, and the rejection of bourgeois morality that characterized aspects of the counterculture aligned well with certain interpretations of Satanic philosophy. By the mid-1960s, all the elements necessary for an explicitly Satanic religious movement had assembled. Literary traditions had reimagined Satan as rebel and hero. Occult movements had demonstrated how alternative religions could be organized and practiced. The left-hand path philosophy had articulated a spiritual approach centered on individual will and transgression. Magical techniques had been developed and codified. Cultural conditions had created space for unconventional beliefs. Popular culture had made occult themes familiar even to general audiences. What was needed was someone willing to synthesize these elements, claim the Satanic label explicitly, and organize a public movement that would unapologetically identify as Satanic. That person was Anton LaVey, who would found the Church of Satan in 1966 and through his writings and media presence define modern Satanism for both practitioners and the general public. LaVey's Church of Satan represented the first organized, public, explicitly Satanic religious movement. What had existed previously as metaphor, symbol, accusation, or underground practice would now emerge into public view, challenging both religious orthodoxy and secular assumptions about the nature and purposes of religion itself. The history of actual Satanism, as distinct from Christian fantasies or literary imagination, was about to begin. Anton LaVey was born Howard Stanton LaVey in 1930 in Chicago, though he spent most of his formative years in the San Francisco Bay Area. The biographical details of his early life are difficult to verify, as LaVey cultivated a deliberately mysterious persona and embellished his history considerably. He claimed to have worked as a lion tamer in a circus, as a police photographer documenting crime scenes, and as an organist in burlesque shows and carnivals. These colorful stories may contain elements of truth, but they also serve to construct an image of someone who had witnessed the full spectrum of human nature, from its most noble to its most depraved. What seems certain is that LaVey possessed a genuine interest in the occult, along with a flair for showmanship and a cynical view of human nature. He was drawn to the aesthetics of horror films, the spectacle of carnival sideshows, and the theatrical presentation of mystery and darkness. He played organ and synthesizer with considerable skill, and music would remain central to his conception of Satanic ritual. By his own account, he became disillusioned with conventional morality after observing the hypocrisy of men who attended burlesque shows on Saturday night and church services with their families on Sunday morning. This observation of the gap between professed virtue and actual behavior would inform his later philosophy. During the late 1950s and early 1960s, LaVey hosted regular gatherings at his home in San Francisco, which he had painted entirely black and filled with occult paraphernalia, taxidermied animals, and other curiosities. These Friday night meetings, which he called the Magic Circle, attracted artists, writers, and others interested in the occult and the macabre. Attendees included novelist Forrest J. Ackerman, underground filmmaker Kenneth Anger, and various local bohemians. LaVey would lecture on occult topics, demonstrate magical techniques, and create an atmosphere of mystery and transgression. These gatherings served as a proving ground for ideas that would later be codified in the Church of Satan. On the night of April 30, 1966, Walpurgisnacht in European folklore, LaVey declared the founding of the Church of Satan. The choice of date was deliberate, linking his organization to pre-Christian European traditions and their association with witchcraft and the supernatural. LaVey proclaimed 1966 as Anno Satanas, Year 1 of the Age of Satan, marking a symbolic break with Christian chronology and values. This theatrical gesture captured LaVey's approach, taking the symbols and rhetoric of Christianity's greatest enemy and proudly claiming them as the foundation for a new religion. The Church of Satan began not as a large organization, but as LaVey's Friday night circle formalized and made public. What distinguished it from previous occult groups was its explicit embrace of the Satanic label and its rejection of the spiritual or supernatural. LaVey's Satanism was atheistic, materialistic, and focused entirely on this world, rather than any hypothetical afterlife. Satan, in LaVey's conception, was not a supernatural being to be worshipped, but rather a symbol representing carnality, vengeance, vital existence, and undefiled wisdom. The name Satan came from the Hebrew word for adversary, and LaVey's church positioned itself as adversary to Christianity's life-denying values. LaVey's philosophy drew on multiple sources, synthesizing them into something distinctive. The influence of Ayn Rand's objectivism was evident in the emphasis on rational self-interest and the celebration of ego. Friedrich Nietzsche's critique of Christian morality as slave morality resonated throughout LaVey's thought. Social Darwinism, the application of evolutionary concepts to human society, appeared in LaVey's stratification theory, which divided humanity into different levels with different needs and capacities. The British occultist Aleister Crowley's dictum, "Do what thou wilt," was adapted, though LaVey stripped away the mystical elements Crowley had invested in the concept of true will. Ragnar Redbeard's Might is Right, a social Darwinist tract from the 1890s that celebrated power and condemned weakness, influenced LaVey significantly, with substantial portions appearing in the Satanic Bible. The work's extreme positions on power, its contempt for Christian charity and mercy, and its celebration of strength aligned with aspects of LaVey's worldview. However, LaVey's Satanism was not purely about domination. It also emphasized aesthetic pleasure, intellectual pursuits, and personal indulgence. The philosophy combined a harsh view of human nature with a hedonistic embrace of earthly pleasures. In 1969, LaVey published the Satanic Bible, the text that would define modern Satanism for both practitioners and critics. The book opens with the 9 satanic statements, which invert Christian teachings. Satan represents indulgence instead of abstinence, vital existence instead of spiritual pipe dreams, undefiled wisdom instead of hypocritical self-deceit, kindness to those who deserve it instead of love wasted on ingrates, vengeance instead of turning the other cheek, responsibility to the responsible instead of concern for psychic vampires, and respect for the animal nature of humanity instead of its suppression. These statements established the core opposition between Satanic and Christian values. Where Christianity emphasized sacrifice, humility, and self-denial, LaVey's Satanism celebrated satisfaction, pride, and self-assertion. Where Christianity promised heavenly rewards for earthly suffering, Satanism focused exclusively on maximizing pleasure and avoiding pain in this life. Where Christianity taught universal love and forgiveness, Satanism advocated selective kindness and enthusiastic vengeance against enemies. The philosophy was deliberately provocative, designed to offend Christian sensibilities while appealing to those who found Christian morality hypocritical or oppressive. The Satanic Bible divided into 4 books, named after the 4 crown princes of hell: Satan, representing indulgence; Lucifer, representing enlightenment; Belial, representing earthly concerns; and Leviathan, representing the abyss. The Book of Satan presented the philosophical foundation, largely adapted from Redbeard's Might is Right. The Book of Lucifer elaborated the philosophy in LaVey's own words, explaining Satanic theory and practice. The Book of Belial provided instructions for ritual magic, despite the philosophy's atheistic materialism. The Book of Leviathan contained invocations and rituals themselves. The apparent contradiction between atheistic philosophy and magical practice was resolved through LaVey's conception of magic as psychodrama. Rituals served psychological and emotional purposes rather than supernatural ones. The elaborate ceremonies, the invocations to demons, the dramatic symbolism, all these elements worked on the participants' consciousness, allowing them to purge emotions, focus will, and access deeper aspects of personality. Magic was real in its effects, even if it operated through psychological rather than supernatural mechanisms. This pragmatic approach to ritual allowed LaVey's Satanism to have its cake and eat it too, embracing occult aesthetics while maintaining atheistic rationalism. LaVeyan ritual was divided into three categories corresponding to different emotional needs. Compassion rituals aimed at helping others or oneself, basically blessing ceremonies. Destruction rituals targeted enemies, channeling anger and desire for revenge into focused cursing. Sex rituals aimed at attracting partners or intensifying desire, employing the powerful emotional energy of lust. Each type of ritual followed similar structures but with appropriate variations in focus and symbolism. The ritual chamber was meant to be sensually stimulating with candles, incense, music, and symbolic tools, creating an atmosphere that engaged the senses and imagination. The Black Mass, the inverted parody of Catholic liturgy that had featured prominently in historical accusations and sensational literature, appeared in LaVey's practice but with significant modifications. LaVey understood the Black Mass primarily as a theatrical protest, a deliberate desecration of Catholic symbols by those who had been psychologically damaged by Catholic upbringing. For someone who truly did not believe in Christian doctrine, desecrating the host or mocking Christian prayers held no particular power. But for someone still psychologically entangled with Catholic teaching, such blasphemy could serve cathartic purposes, helping to break emotional bonds to the Church. LaVey's most famous ritual performance was probably the Satanic wedding he conducted for journalist John Raymond and socialite Judith Case in 1967. The ceremony was covered by national media, introducing many Americans to the Church of Satan for the first time. LaVey, dressed in his trademark black outfit with a clerical collar, presided over a ritual that combined traditional marriage elements with satanic symbolism. A naked woman served as the altar, a detail that scandalized observers and became a signature element of LaVeyan ritual. The publicity demonstrated LaVey's genius for generating media attention and using controversy to spread awareness of his movement. LaVey also performed Satanic baptisms, most notoriously for his own daughter, Zena, in 1967. The ceremony, photographed and widely publicized, showed LaVey holding his infant daughter while reading Satanic invocations. Critics denounced the baptism as child abuse, indoctrinating an innocent into evil. LaVey defended it as no different from Christian baptism, which also claimed an infant for a particular religious tradition without the child's consent. The controversy generated enormous publicity, establishing LaVey's willingness to provoke and his skill at turning outrage into attention. The Church of Satan attracted a diverse membership during its early years. Some joined out of genuine philosophical conviction, finding in LaVey's writings an articulation of beliefs they had held privately. Others were drawn by the theatrical spectacle and countercultural cachet. Still others came from occult backgrounds, seeking an organization that embraced darker magical traditions. The Bay Area location meant the church intersected with various bohemian and artistic subcultures, attracting musicians, filmmakers, and other creative individuals. Several notable figures became associated with the Church of Satan, either as members or through collaboration. Filmmaker Kenneth Anger, whose experimental films explored occult themes, was involved with the organization, though his relationship with LaVey eventually soured. Sammy Davis Jr., the entertainer, reportedly joined the church, attracted by its philosophy and its transgressive reputation. Various musicians from the emerging heavy metal scene showed interest, drawn to satanic imagery and rebellion against conventional morality. The church's connections to entertainment and arts gave it visibility and cultural influence beyond its actual membership numbers. LaVey was a savvy media manipulator who understood that publicity, even negative publicity, served his purposes. He cultivated a demonic image, shaving his head and beard into a diabolical point, dressing in black, surrounding himself with skulls and occult paraphernalia. Photographs and films from this period show LaVey performing rituals, playing ominous organ music, or posing with his pet lion. Every element was calculated to project an image of sinister sophistication, making LaVey himself into a living symbol of Satanism. The Church of Satan established a grotto system, local chapters in various cities, that operated under the central organization's authority. Grottos allowed members in different regions to gather for rituals and socializing without needing to travel to San Francisco. LaVey appointed grotto masters to lead these groups, creating a hierarchical structure with himself at the apex. The organization developed degree systems and titles, borrowing from both Masonic traditions and the elaborate rankings of ceremonial magic orders. Members could advance through degrees based on their contributions and involvement, with higher degrees carrying prestigious titles like priest or priestess of the Church of Satan. LaVey's subsequent books elaborated different aspects of Satanic philosophy and practice. The Complete Witch, later retitled The Satanic Witch, provided advice for women on manipulating men and society, combining occult theory with practical psychology. The Satanic rituals presented ceremonies drawing on various historical and cultural traditions, from the Knights Templar to H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythology. The Devil's Notebook and Satan Speaks collected LaVey's essays and observations on various topics, showcasing his cynicism, dark humor, and unconventional perspectives. LaVey's Satanism offered a particular vision of human nature and proper living that resonated with certain temperaments. It validated selfishness, which it reframed as healthy self-interest. It celebrated sexuality as natural and pleasurable rather than shameful. It encouraged vengeance against those who caused harm rather than forgiveness. It recognized that humanity was fundamentally animal, driven by instinct and desire, and argued that acknowledging this truth was more honest than Christian pretensions to transcendent spirituality. For those who felt oppressed by Christian guilt or stifled by conventional morality, this philosophy offered liberation. Yet LaVey's Satanism also had clear limitations and contradictions. The social Darwinist elements, with their contempt for weakness and celebration of might, troubled even some sympathetic observers. The organization's authoritarian structure, with LaVey as ultimate authority, contradicted the emphasis on individual will and freedom. The reliance on shock value and publicity stunts sometimes obscured the philosophical content. The incorporation of ritual and occult aesthetics sat uneasily with the stated atheistic materialism, no matter how cleverly LaVey explained magic as psychodrama. By the early 1970s, the Church of Satan had achieved its primary goal, establishing Satanism as a recognizable religious movement with a defined philosophy and public presence. LaVey had successfully claimed the Satanic label, inverting its negative connotations and transforming it into a source of pride and identity for his followers. The Church of Satan would continue to exist and grow, though it would also face challenges, schisms, and competitors as Satanism diversified beyond LaVey's original formulation. The genie was out of the bottle. Organized, self-identified Satanism was now a permanent feature of the religious landscape. The emergence of the Church of Satan did not exhaust the possibilities for satanic practice and belief. While LaVey's atheistic, symbolic approach to Satanism attracted many followers, others found it philosophically unsatisfying. For these individuals, Satan represented more than a symbol or psychological archetype. They understood Satan, demons, and the forces associated with the left-hand path as real entities or real aspects of reality deserving of literal worship or magical engagement. This divide between atheistic and theistic Satanism would become one of the most significant fault lines in the Satanic movement, generating distinct traditions with different practices, philosophies, and organizations. Theistic Satanism, sometimes called spiritual Satanism or traditional Satanism, encompasses a wide range of beliefs and practices united by the conviction that Satan or related entities exist in some meaningful sense beyond mere symbol. This does not necessarily mean accepting the Christian mythology wholesale. Many theistic Satanists reject Christian cosmology while maintaining belief in Satan as a real force or being. They might understand Satan as an ancient deity predating Christianity, as a powerful spiritual entity, as an aspect of cosmic consciousness, or as a force within nature and human psychology that can be engaged through magical practice. The most prominent theistic Satanic organization emerged from a schism within the Church of Satan itself. Michael Aquino had been a significant figure in LaVey's organization, serving as editor of the Church of Satan newsletter and holding the title of Magister. He was an army officer with a background in military intelligence and a serious interest in occultism. By the mid-1970s, Aquino had become increasingly dissatisfied with aspects of LaVey's leadership, particularly what he saw as the commercialization of the church and the emphasis on theatrical spectacle over genuine magical practice. In 1975, Aquino performed a ritual in which he claimed to have received communication from Set, the ancient Egyptian deity often associated with chaos, deserts, and foreigners. This entity, which Aquino identified as the true form of Satan, revealed that the Church of Satan had fulfilled its purpose and that a new organization was needed to carry forward the work of the left-hand path. Aquino called this communication the Book of Coming Forth by Night, deliberately echoing the Egyptian Book of Coming Forth by Day, commonly known as the Book of the Dead. This text became the foundational scripture for Aquino's new organization, the Temple of Set. The Temple of Set represented a significant departure from LaVeyan Satanism, despite sharing some philosophical foundations. Where LaVey's Satanism was atheistic and focused on earthly satisfaction, Aquino's Setianism was explicitly theistic and concerned with spiritual transformation and immortality. The temple taught that Set was a real entity, the oldest and most fundamental divine being who had appeared throughout history under various names, including Satan. Set represented isolation, individualism, and the conscious mind's ability to stand apart from nature. The goal of the temple's magical practice was Zepa, an Egyptian word meaning "I have come into being," representing the process of conscious self-creation and achieving a form of immortality through perfecting the self. The Temple of Set organized itself more formally than the Church of Satan, with a detailed hierarchical structure, rigorous study requirements, and an emphasis on scholarship alongside magical practice. Members progressed through degrees not simply through participation, but through demonstrating mastery of increasingly advanced magical and philosophical concepts. The organization published substantial amounts of written material, creating a comprehensive body of Setian philosophy and practice. Aquino's military background was evident in the temple's organized structure and systematic approach to magical training. Setian philosophy emphasized the concept of isolate intelligence, the idea that consciousness could and should separate itself from the automatic processes of nature and the collective consciousness of humanity. Where nature operated through deterministic patterns and most humans lived as unconscious products of biology and environment, the practitioner of the left-hand path sought to become truly individual, truly conscious, truly self-determining. This required magical practice understood not as manipulation of external forces but as transformation of the self. The Temple of Set's magical system drew heavily on ancient Egyptian religion, Platonic philosophy, and modern occultism, synthesizing these elements into a sophisticated framework. Rituals involved invocations to Set and other deities from various pantheons, understood as aspects or manifestations of the Prince of Darkness. The practice emphasized will, consciousness, and the development of personal power. Unlike LaVey's psychodrama model, Setian magic claimed to work through genuine spiritual forces and to produce results through interactions with real, non-material entities or dimensions of reality. The organization attracted serious occultists, scholars of religion, and those dissatisfied with the limitations of atheistic Satanism. Members included academics, military personnel, and professionals who approached Satanism as a sophisticated spiritual path rather than countercultural rebellion. The temple published substantial scholarly work on Egyptian religion, Western esotericism, and left-hand path philosophy, contributing to academic discourse about these topics. The intellectual rigor and spiritual focus distinguished Satanism from the more flamboyant, media-focused approach of the Church of Satan. Disputes between the Church of Satan and the Temple of Set were inevitable, given their shared origins and competing claims to represent true Satanism. LaVey dismissed Aquino's claims of divine communication and argued that theistic Satanism represented a regression into the superstitious thinking that his Satanism had rejected. Aquino countered that LaVey's atheistic approach missed the genuine spiritual potential of the left-hand path and reduced Satanism to mere philosophy and theatre. These arguments reflected deeper philosophical differences about the nature of consciousness, the existence of spiritual realities, and the purposes of magical practice. Beyond these organized movements, numerous individuals and small groups practiced forms of theistic Satanism that varied considerably in belief and practice. Some engaged in what they considered traditional witchcraft, understanding Satan as the horned god of pre-Christian European paganism. Others practiced demonolatry, the worship or veneration of demons from Christian demonology, understanding these entities as powerful spiritual beings who had been slandered by Christianity. Still others developed highly idiosyncratic systems, combining satanic themes with various other esoteric traditions. Demonolatry as a distinct practice emerged particularly through the work of groups claiming descent from historical witch cults or preserving ancient traditions. Whether such continuity existed remains highly disputed, with most scholars skeptical of claims to unbroken transmission of pre-Christian Satan worship. Regardless of historical authenticity, modern demonolatry developed its own practices and theology. Practitioners venerated various demons from the grimoire tradition and Christian demonology, approaching them as powerful entities worthy of respect and capable of forming beneficial relationships with humans who approached them properly. Different demonolatry systems organized demons into hierarchies, assigned them specific attributes and areas of influence, and developed rituals for invoking and working with them. Some practitioners distinguished between demons as spiritual entities and the Judeo-Christian God, whom they might reject as oppressive or even view as the true evil power. Others understood demons as aspects of a more complex spiritual reality, neither purely good nor purely evil, but powerful and potentially dangerous forces that required skill and caution to engage. Demonolatry often emphasized respect for demonic entities, contrasting itself with the command and compulsion approach of ceremonial magic. The Order of Nine Angles, a British organization that emerged in the 1960s and became more public in the 1980s, represented perhaps the most extreme and controversial form of Satanism. The ONA promoted a philosophy that combined Satanism with Nazism, advocating for a form of spiritual social Darwinism through which the weak would be destroyed and a new elite would emerge. The group's texts, attributed to the pseudonymous Anton, presented a demanding path of physical and mental development, including advocacy for activities that would clearly be criminal if actually practiced. The Order of Nine Angles made provocation and transgression central to its system, arguing that overcoming moral constraints and social conditioning required engaging in acts that society deemed utterly unacceptable. The organization's texts discussed human sacrifice, violence, and infiltration of other organizations as legitimate practices for advanced adherence. Whether the ONA actually practiced what it preached or simply used extreme rhetoric for testing and shocking potential members remains unclear. Many observers, including other Satanists, condemned the ONA as either genuinely dangerous or at best irresponsibly romanticizing evil. The question of where transgression becomes genuine evil rather than liberating antinomianism divided Satanic communities. LaVey's Satanism, despite its provocative rhetoric, contained clear ethical boundaries. The 11 Satanic rules of the earth included prohibitions against harming children or animals unless for food or self-defense, against making sexual advances unless given consent signals, and against taking without permission. These rules established that Satanism was not licensed for any behavior, but rather had its own moral framework centered on respect for those who deserved respect, and harm only to those who caused harm first. More extreme forms of Satanism rejected such limitations, arguing that true left-hand path practice required willingness to transcend all moral constraints. This position raised profound questions about whether absolute moral relativism was coherent or desirable, whether some actions were wrong regardless of philosophical justification, and whether communities could function without shared ethical standards. The presence of groups like the Honor challenged other Satanists to clarify where they stood on these issues and to distinguish their practice from what they might consider illegitimate extremism. Chaos Gnostic Satanism represented another strand, combining chaos magic's pragmatic approach with Gnostic cosmology. These practitioners understood Satan as the serpent in Eden, who offered humanity knowledge, viewing the Judeo-Christian God as the demiurge, a false or limited creator who sought to keep humanity ignorant and imprisoned in matter. Chaos Gnostic Satanists employed magical techniques from chaos magic alongside invocations to Satan, demons, and other entities understood as forces of liberation and gnosis. This approach emphasized experimentation, personal revelation, and skepticism toward dogma, including Satanic dogma. The diversity of theistic Satanism created challenges for understanding and categorizing the movement. Unlike the Church of Satan, which had relatively clear boundaries and defined doctrine, theistic Satanism encompassed wildly different beliefs and practices. Some theistic Satanists worshipped Satan as supreme deity, others viewed him as one powerful entity among many, still others understood Satan as a symbol for natural forces or aspects of consciousness, while maintaining these had real existence beyond human psychology. The unifying thread was rejection of the atheistic materialist position, and affirmation that Satanic practice involved engagement with real spiritual forces or entities. The Internet's emergence in the 1990s dramatically affected Satanic movements, particularly theistic variants. Online forums, websites, and later social media allowed individuals practicing various forms of Satanism to connect, share ideas, and develop communities. Isolated practitioners could find others with similar interests. Information about different traditions became widely available. The democratic nature of online communication meant that anyone could present their interpretation of Satanism without needing institutional authority or publishing contracts. This democratization had both positive and negative effects. On one hand, it allowed genuine diversity to flourish, with various approaches to Satanism finding audiences and developing followings. Theistic Satanists no longer needed to affiliate with either the Church of Satan or the Temple of Set, but could explore independent paths or create their own small organizations. On the other hand, the lack of gatekeeping meant that misinformation, fantasy, and genuinely concerning ideologies could spread easily. Distinguishing between serious practitioners and role-players or trolls became increasingly difficult. Joy of Satan Ministries represented one influential online theistic satanic organization, though controversial within the broader satanic community. The group, founded by Maxine Dietrich in the early 2000s, promoted a form of Satanism combining elements from multiple sources including Sumerian mythology, yoga, and National Socialism. The organization's website contained extensive material on spiritual Satanism, meditation practices, and working with demons understood as ancient gods. However, its promotion of anti-Semitism and white nationalism led many other Satanists to denounce it as corrupting satanic philosophy with racial hatred. The relationship between Satanism and political extremism remained contentious. While some Satanists embraced radical politics as consistent with rebellion against authority, others argued that genuine Satanism was individualist and neither left nor right politically. The question of whether Satanism had inherent political implications or was compatible with various political positions generated ongoing debate. LaVey himself had been politically conservative in many ways, while many modern Satanists leaned toward libertarian or anarchist positions. The presence of Nazi-influenced groups claiming the Satanic label complicated efforts to define what Satanism stood for politically. Luciferianism emerged as a related but distinct tradition, emphasizing the light-bringer aspect of the diabolic figure rather than the adversarial or destructive elements. Luciferians often distinguished their practice from Satanism proper, viewing Lucifer as representing enlightenment, knowledge, and spiritual evolution rather than earthly power or indulgence. Organizations like the Greater Church of Lucifer promoted a philosophy combining elements of Gnosticism, Thelema, and left-hand path practice, while rejecting the more provocative or transgressive aspects of Satanism. Luciferianism appealed to those attracted to dark spirituality, but uncomfortable with satanic imagery and associations. By the early 21st century, the satanic landscape had become extraordinarily diverse. LaVey's Church of Satan continued to exist, maintaining its atheistic position and claiming to represent true Satanism. The Temple of Set offered a theistic alternative with sophisticated philosophy and structured practice. Numerous other organizations, ranging from serious magical orders to internet-based communities, promoted various forms of theistic, spiritual, or traditional Satanism. Independent practitioners developed highly personal approaches, drawing on whatever sources they found meaningful. The only common element was identification with Satan or related figures as central to belief and practice, but what that identification meant varied dramatically from person to person and group to group. The 1980s witnessed an extraordinary outbreak of panic, centered on claims of widespread satanic ritual abuse. This moral panic, primarily concentrated in the United States, but with echoes in other English-speaking countries, represented a collision between ancient fears of devil worship, modern therapeutic practices, religious fundamentalism, and media sensationalism. The Satanic Panic, as it came to be known, destroyed lives, resulted in wrongful convictions, and created a climate of suspicion and fear that affected how Satanism was perceived for decades afterward. Understanding this phenomenon requires examining its multiple causes, its development and peak, and its eventual collapse under the weight of evidence demonstrating that the vast satanic conspiracy simply did not exist. The panic's roots lay in several cultural and social currents of the 1970s and early 1980s. The sexual revolution and changing family structures generated anxiety about traditional values and child-rearing practices. Increasing awareness of actual child abuse, which had previously been hidden or ignored, created legitimate concern for children's welfare, but also made people receptive to claims of previously unknown forms of abuse. The rise of fundamentalist Christianity, with its emphasis on spiritual warfare against demonic forces, provided a religious framework within which satanic conspiracy theories made sense. Popular culture, through films like The Exorcist and books about occult themes, had made demonic possession and satanic activity part of mainstream consciousness. The publication of Michelle Remembers in 1980 provided the narrative template for satanic ritual abuse claims. The book, co-authored by Canadian psychiatrist Lawrence Pasda and his patient Michelle Smith, whom he later married, purported to document Smith's recovered memories of horrific abuse by a satanic cult during her childhood. According to the account, Smith had been subjected to torture, witnessed human sacrifice, was sewn into the corpse of a dead person, and experienced other nightmarish scenarios involving robed cultists worshipping Satan. The memories had supposedly been repressed for years before emerging during therapy sessions with Pasda. Michelle Remembers became a bestseller and was widely covered in media. It established many elements that would recur in subsequent satanic abuse claims: robed figures performing rituals, animal and human sacrifice, forced consumption of blood or body parts, torture justified as religious ceremony, and the systematic abuse of children as part of devil worship. The book's popularity and the apparent credibility of a psychiatrist vouching for its truth made the claims seem plausible to many readers. That subsequent investigation found no evidence supporting the stories and revealed significant problems with Pazder's therapeutic techniques did not prevent the book's enormous influence. The development of recovered memory therapy played a crucial role in the Satanic Panic. This therapeutic approach, which gained popularity in the 1980s, was based on the premise that traumatic memories could be completely repressed and later recovered through therapy. Therapists using these techniques employed hypnosis, guided imagery, and suggestion to help patients access supposedly buried memories. The problem, as later research would demonstrate, was that these techniques could also create false memories, particularly when therapists had preconceived ideas about what patients should remember. Patients entering therapy for depression, anxiety, or other issues might be asked if they had experienced childhood trauma. If they could not remember specific abuse, some therapists interpreted this absence of memory as evidence of repression, suggesting that the trauma must have been particularly severe. Through repeated sessions employing suggestive techniques, patients began to remember abuse scenarios. These memories often started vague but became increasingly detailed and elaborate over time. Patients who initially remembered no abuse might eventually produce detailed accounts of ritual torture, forced participation in ceremonies, and witnessing murders. The content of recovered memories often reflected cultural anxieties and therapeutic presuppositions rather than actual events. Patients in therapy with practitioners influenced by Michelle Remembers and similar accounts began recovering strikingly similar memories involving satanic cults. The consistency of these accounts across different patients and therapists seemed to confirm the reality of widespread satanic abuse. In reality, the consistency reflected the circulation of abuse narratives through therapeutic communities, support groups, and popular culture, creating a shared script that influenced memory formation. Fundamentalist Christian networks amplified and spread satanic abuse claims through churches, conferences, and media. Evangelical speakers toured the country, presenting seminars on satanic ritual abuse, training social workers, police officers, and therapists to recognize signs of involvement in satanic cults. These presentations described elaborate conspiracies involving thousands or even millions of Satanists who abused children as part of their religious practices. The seminars taught that certain symbols, including pentagrams, the number 666, and even peace signs or rainbows, indicated satanic involvement. The role of self-proclaimed former Satanists in spreading panic cannot be overstated. Individuals like Mike Warnke, who claimed to have been a high priest in a satanic cult before converting to Christianity, toured churches sharing lurid tales of satanic practices. Lauren Stratford published a memoir describing years of abuse by Satanists who bred babies for sacrifice. These accounts, presented as first-hand testimony, seem to confirm the worst fears about satanic cults. That both Warnke and Stratford were later exposed as fabricators, with journalists documenting that their stories were false, did little to undo the damage their testimonies had caused. The panic reached its most destructive phase in the daycare abuse cases of the mid-1980s. The McMartin preschool case in California became the longest and most expensive criminal trial in American history. Beginning with a single accusation from a mother later determined to be mentally ill, the case expanded to include hundreds of alleged victims and claims of underground tunnels where satanic rituals were performed. Children were subjected to repeated interrogations using leading questions and suggestive techniques. Under this pressure, some children made increasingly bizarre accusations, including flying through the air, being flushed down toilets to secret rooms and witnessing animal sacrifice. Similar cases erupted across the country. The Fells Acres Day School case in Massachusetts, the Little Rascals case in North Carolina, and dozens of others followed similar patterns. Adults working in daycare facilities were accused of molesting children during satanic rituals. The charges often included not only sexual abuse but also animal sacrifice, coprophagia, and murder. Though no bodies or physical evidence were ever found, trials relied heavily on testimony from children whose accounts had been shaped through suggestive interviewing techniques and therapy designed to help them remember abuse. The interrogation techniques used with children in these cases were later widely criticized as grossly improper. Interviewers asked leading questions, praised children when they made accusations, and applied pressure to children who denied abuse. Anatomically correct dolls were used in ways that encouraged sexual responses. Children were told that other children had already revealed abuse, making them feel they should say the same. The interviews continued until children produced the desired accusations, with earlier denials treated as further evidence of trauma rather than indicators that abuse had not occurred. Convictions resulted in numerous cases, with defendants receiving lengthy prison sentences despite the absence of physical evidence and the implausible nature of many claims. The criminal justice system, confronted with emotional testimony about child abuse, was reluctant to appear unsympathetic to victims. Prosecutors emphasized that children should be believed, that lack of physical evidence was not exculpatory, and that the bizarre nature of allegations reflected the severe trauma victims had experienced. Defense attorneys who questioned child witnesses risked appearing callous or contributing to further victimization. The media played a significant role in amplifying and sustaining the panic. Television programs, news reports, and talk shows featured discussions of satanic ritual abuse, often presenting the claims uncritically. Geraldo Rivera's 1988 television special, Devil Worship: Exposing Satan's Underground, was watched by millions and presented satanic abuse as a confirmed reality. The program featured interviews with alleged survivors, law enforcement officials claiming to investigate satanic crimes, and experts warning of a vast underground network of devil worshippers. The special had enormous influence, making satanic abuse seem like a major social problem requiring urgent attention. Law enforcement agencies faced pressure to take satanic crimes seriously. Some officers received training from fundamentalist Christian sources about satanic symbolism and cult activity. Police departments created specialized units to investigate ritual abuse. The FBI, under pressure from concerned citizens and legislators, investigated claims of satanic conspiracies. However, investigations repeatedly failed to produce evidence of organized satanic abuse networks. No bodies were found, no physical evidence of ritual sites emerged, and claims about multi-generational satanic cults proved impossible to substantiate. The publication of the FBI's report on satanic ritual abuse in 1992, authored by Supervisory Special Agent Kenneth Lanning, marked a turning point. Lanning had investigated hundreds of allegations over several years, reviewing evidence and interviewing alleged victims, therapists, and law enforcement officials. His report concluded that there was no credible evidence of widespread satanic conspiracies abusing children. The claims were inconsistent with how criminal organizations operate. The alleged numbers of victims and perpetrators were implausible, and the absence of physical evidence, despite intensive investigation, was insurmountable. Lanning's report identified several alternative explanations for satanic abuse allegations. Some claims involved actual abuse by individuals who used satanic or occult themes, but were not part of organized cults. Some reflected false accusations made during custody disputes. Many resulted from suggestive therapeutic and interrogation techniques, creating false memories. The report emphasized that genuine concern for child welfare should not lead to acceptance of claims unsupported by evidence. The FBI's position, backed by its investigative authority, helped shift opinion among law enforcement and social services professionals. Academic research into memory and suggestion provided crucial evidence debunking recovered memory claims. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus conducted experiments demonstrating that false memories could be implanted through suggestion, showing that people could be led to remember events that never occurred with the same conviction as genuine memories. Studies of children's susceptibility to suggestion revealed how improper interviewing could produce false allegations. The scientific consensus emerged that recovered memory therapy was unreliable and that memories emerging only during therapy, especially when therapists believed in ritual abuse, should be treated with extreme skepticism. Appeals and reviews of the daycare cases began to reveal the weakness of evidence and the impropriety of interrogation techniques. Some convictions were overturned, though often only after defendants had served years in prison. The Kern County cases in California, which had resulted in numerous convictions based on claims of satanic abuse, were largely reversed, after review revealed that prosecutorial misconduct and unreliable evidence had produced wrongful convictions. However, many defendants remained imprisoned, and the exoneration process was slow and incomplete. Professional organizations began issuing guidelines and warnings about recovered memory therapy and satanic abuse claims. The American Psychological Association and similar bodies emphasized the need for evidence-based practice and warned against techniques likely to produce false memories. The False Memory Syndrome Foundation, established by families whose adult children had made abuse allegations based on recovered memories, provided support and promoted awareness of false memory phenomena. These organizational responses helped establish new standards for therapy and forensic interviewing. The panic gradually subsided in the mid-1990s as accumulating evidence made the satanic conspiracy claims increasingly untenable. Media coverage became more skeptical, with journalists investigating and debunking specific cases. The cultural moment that had made the panic possible, the intersection of anxieties about children, family, and social change with therapeutic fads and religious fears, began to pass. Public attention moved to other concerns, and the moral panic exhausted itself. The legacy of the satanic panic was profound and long-lasting. Innocent people had been imprisoned, families destroyed, and careers ruined based on false allegations. The panic demonstrated how easily fear and suggestion could create apparently credible accusations completely divorced from reality. It revealed the dangers of therapeutic techniques that prioritized belief over evidence, and the problems with interrogation methods that coerced testimony from vulnerable witnesses. It showed how religious ideology and cultural anxiety could overwhelm rational evaluation of claims. For actual Satanists, the panic was deeply troubling. Organizations like the Church of Satan found themselves associated with crimes they had nothing to do with, their philosophy and practice misrepresented as justification for child abuse. The panic reinforced the worst stereotypes about Satanism, reviving medieval fantasies of devil-worshipping child murderers and applying them to contemporary religious movements. Satanists faced discrimination, lost jobs, and experienced harassment based on the assumption that their religion involved criminal activity. The distinction between actual satanic practice and the paranoid fantasies of the panic was lost on much of the public. The satanic panic also revealed persistent tensions in American culture about religion, morality, and authority. The willingness to believe in vast hidden conspiracies reflected distrust of social institutions and expertise. The embrace of recovered memory, despite scientific evidence of its unreliability, revealed the power of emotional appeal over rational assessment. The panic showed that centuries-old fears about Satan and his worshippers remained potent, capable of being activated under the right conditions despite living in a supposedly secular, scientific age. The witch hunts had not ended in the 18th century. They had merely taken new forms, with therapists' offices and courtrooms replacing torture chambers but serving similar functions of extracting false confessions and punishing imaginary crimes. The 21st century brought dramatic changes to the landscape of Satanism, particularly through the emergence of the Satanic Temple, an organization that would redefine public perceptions of what Satanism could be and accomplish. Founded in 2013 by Doug Mesner, who uses the pseudonym Lucian Greaves, and Malcolm Jarry, the Satanic Temple represented a departure from previous satanic organizations in both philosophy and tactics. While the Church of Satan had focused primarily on individual members' private practice and the Temple of Set on esoteric spiritual development, the Satanic Temple oriented itself toward public activism and political engagement, using satanic identity as a tool for advocating religious pluralism and challenging Christian privilege in public spaces. The Satanic Temple emerged during a period of increasing tension over religion in American public life. Christian organizations and politicians had achieved significant success in placing religious symbols on public property, incorporating prayer into government functions, and claiming religious exemptions from various legal requirements. These victories, framed by their proponents as protecting religious freedom, increasingly appeared to critics as establishing Christianity as a de facto state religion. The Satanic Temple recognized that the same legal principles invoked to support Christian religious expression could be used to challenge it, and that satanic symbolism provided an effective vehicle for making those challenges. The organization's strategy was elegant in its simplicity. If Christian groups could place monuments on government property, erect nativity scenes at capitals, or distribute religious materials in public schools, then the Satanic Temple would demand equal access for satanic expression. The predictable outrage this generated served multiple purposes. It exposed the hypocrisy of those who supported religious freedom only for their preferred religion. It forced governments to choose between genuine religious pluralism and abandoning religious expression in public spaces. It generated media attention that spread the temple's message far beyond what its modest resources could otherwise achieve. The first major campaign involved a monument to Baphomet, the goat-headed figure that had become associated with occultism and Satanism. When Oklahoma placed a Ten Commandments monument on the grounds of the state capitol, the Satanic Temple applied for permission to erect their own monument featuring Baphomet seated on a throne with two children gazing up admiringly. The proposed monument was beautifully designed and elaborately detailed, created by professional sculptors. The request generated national media coverage and intense controversy. Christians who had championed the Ten Commandments monument suddenly found themselves explaining why religious pluralism should not actually include Satanism. The Oklahoma case revealed the fundamental tension in arguments for religious expression in public spaces. Proponents of such expression claimed they sought only to acknowledge America's religious heritage and allow free exercise of religion. However, when confronted with the logical extension of their position that Satanists had equal rights to public religious expression, many revealed that their actual goal was Christian privilege rather than genuine religious freedom. The controversy forced difficult conversations about what religious pluralism actually meant and whether the public square could truly accommodate all religious perspectives. The legal battle over the Oklahoma monument continued for years, eventually becoming moot when the state Supreme Court ruled that all religious monuments must be removed from Capitol grounds. This outcome represented a victory for the Satanic Temple's core position: either allow all religious expression or allow none, but preferential treatment for Christianity violated constitutional principles. The Baphomet statue, having served its purpose, was displayed at various Satanic Temple events and became an iconic symbol of the organization. Similar campaigns followed in other states and contexts. When Arkansas erected a Ten Commandments monument, the Satanic Temple again applied for equal access. When Christian groups distributed Bibles in public schools, the Satanic Temple created the Satanic Children's Big Book of Activities and sought to distribute it through the same channels. When Christian organizations established after-school religious programs in public schools, The Satanic Temple created after-school Satan clubs offering an alternative focused on reason, science, and critical thinking rather than religious indoctrination. The after-school Satan clubs generated particularly intense reactions. Parents and community members who had supported Christian after-school programs suddenly objected to religious activities in schools. School boards that had approved Christian clubs faced legal challenges when they attempted to exclude Satanic ones. The campaigns succeeded in their goals regardless of outcome. If schools allowed the Satanic clubs, it demonstrated genuine religious pluralism. If schools excluded them or ended all religious after-school programs to avoid including Satanism, it showed that Christian groups had been exploiting public resources for evangelism rather than merely exercising religious freedom. The Satanic Temple's approach to religious exemptions followed similar logic. When the Supreme Court ruled in Burwell versus Hobby Lobby that closely held corporations could claim religious exemptions from providing contraceptive coverage, the Satanic Temple recognized implications beyond the immediate case. If sincere religious belief justified exemption from generally applicable laws, then Satanists could claim similar exemptions. The temple developed a religious reproductive rights campaign, arguing that their members' religious beliefs included bodily autonomy and that mandatory waiting periods and counseling requirements for abortion violated their religious freedom. This reproductive rights activism represented more than clever legal maneuvering. The Satanic Temple genuinely opposed restrictions on abortion access and understood reproductive freedom as a fundamental right. By framing abortion access as a religious freedom issue, they sought to use the same legal tools conservative Christians had employed to advance a progressive cause. The campaign filed lawsuits challenging waiting periods and mandatory counseling as violations of Satanic Temple members' religious liberty, arguing that their sincerely held religious beliefs included the right to make reproductive decisions without state interference. The reproductive rights work highlighted a significant philosophical difference between the Satanic Temple and earlier Satanic organizations. LaVey's Church of Satan had been politically conservative or libertarian, emphasizing individualism and social Darwinism. The Satanic Temple explicitly embraced progressive political positions, supporting LGBTQ rights, reproductive freedom, and separation of church and state. This political orientation attracted members from secular and progressive communities who might not have been drawn to Satanism otherwise, but found in the Satanic Temple an organization that aligned with their values while offering a dramatic way to challenge religious conservatism. The Satanic Temple's 7 tenets articulated a moral framework emphasizing compassion, justice, personal autonomy, and scientific understanding. These tenets included principles like striving to act with compassion and empathy toward all creatures, pursuing justice and respecting the freedoms of others, and beliefs conforming to available scientific evidence. The tenets were explicitly designed to be ethically defensible and broadly appealing, demonstrating that Satanism did not require rejection of compassion or embrace of cruelty. This was a direct challenge to Christian assumptions that morality required religious faith and that Satanism necessarily meant evil. The organization's tax-exempt status as a recognized religion represented a significant achievement and controversy. The IRS granted the Satanic Temple religious organization status in 2019, affirming that it met legal criteria for a religion despite its non-theistic philosophy and activist orientation. This recognition provided legitimacy and legal standing for the temple's various campaigns. It also generated criticism from those who argued that the Satanic Temple was not a sincere religion, but rather political activism wrapped in religious language. The question of sincerity, however, proved difficult to resolve, as legal standards for religious sincerity are intentionally minimal to avoid government entanglement with religious belief. Whether the Satanic Temple constituted a genuine religion or primarily a political movement remained contested even among its members and supporters. Some joined because they sincerely identified with Satanic philosophy and symbolism, finding in the temple a religious home that reflected their actual beliefs. Others participated primarily for political reasons, seeing membership as a form of activism against Christian nationalism and religious overreach. The organization accommodated both motivations, functioning simultaneously as a religion and a civil rights organization. This dual nature was perhaps unprecedented, but reflected broader blurring of boundaries between religion, identity, and political activism in contemporary society. The Satanic Temple grew rapidly, establishing chapters in cities across the United States and internationally. Local chapters conducted community service projects, organized social events, and pursued campaigns relevant to their regions. The organization's structure was more democratic than the hierarchical Church of Satan, with significant autonomy given to local groups. This decentralization allowed flexibility and local engagement, but also created challenges in maintaining consistent messaging and preventing chapters from taking positions or actions that might conflict with the national organization's goals. Tensions between the Satanic Temple and the Church of Satan were inevitable and often bitter. The Church of Satan viewed the temple as an illegitimate upstart that misrepresented Satanism and engaged in publicity stunts rather than serious religious practice. LaVey's organization emphasized that it had originated modern Satanism and maintained the authentic tradition, while the Satanic Temple was merely using satanic aesthetics for political theater. The temple responded that Satanism was not owned by any single organization, and that its approach was a valid evolution of satanic philosophy addressing contemporary concerns. These disputes reflected deeper questions about authority and authenticity in religious movements. Who could define what Satanism was? Did the Church of Satan's historical priority give it exclusive claim to represent Satanism? Or could new organizations develop alternative interpretations and practices that were equally valid? The debate mirrored similar controversies in other religious traditions about orthodoxy, innovation, and the boundaries of acceptable diversity. The existence of multiple satanic organizations with incompatible philosophies demonstrated that Satanism, like other religions, was contested terrain with no single authoritative voice. The Satanic Temple's success in generating media coverage transformed public visibility of Satanism, where previous satanic organizations had been relatively obscure, known primarily to those specifically interested in occultism or alternative religion. The Satanic Temple became a regular presence in news media. Stories about the Baphomet Monument, after-school programs, and reproductive rights campaigns introduced millions of people to a form of Satanism that contradicted their assumptions. Rather than evil devil worshippers, they encountered articulate activists advocating for pluralism and civil rights. Documentary filmmaker Penny Lane's 2019 film, Hail Satan, provided sympathetic coverage of the Satanic Temple, following its campaigns and exploring members' motivations. The film humanized Satanists, showing them as ordinary people with diverse backgrounds united by commitment to challenging religious privilege. The documentary reached audiences through film festivals and streaming platforms, further normalizing Satanism and presenting it as a legitimate form of religious expression and political engagement. The contrast between the film's portrayal and the satanic panic of the 1980s could hardly have been starker. Social media amplified the Satanic Temple's reach and effectiveness. Campaigns could be coordinated across chapters, media coverage shared widely, and support mobilized rapidly. The organization cultivated a social media presence that was witty, confrontational, and designed for viral spread. Memes featuring Baphomet or satirizing Christian privilege spread through progressive networks, introducing Satanic Temple messaging to people who might never have encountered it otherwise. The organization demonstrated sophisticated understanding of digital communication and used it effectively to advance its agenda. The Satanic Temple's activism also included direct community service. Chapters organized blood drives, highway cleanups, food collections, and other charitable activities. These service projects served multiple purposes. They demonstrated that Satanists could be good community members and engage in pro-social behavior. They challenged stereotypes about Satanism necessarily involving selfishness or harm. They provided concrete benefits to communities, and they generated positive media coverage that countered negative perceptions. The sight of Satanists in ritual robes cleaning highways or donating blood made for compelling images that complicated simplistic narratives about good and evil. Legal challenges remained ongoing, with the Satanic Temple pursuing multiple cases related to religious freedom and pluralism. Some succeeded in achieving concrete policy changes or establishing legal precedents. Others served primarily to raise awareness and force conversations about religious privilege. The organization's legal strategy was sophisticated, employing skilled attorneys and carefully selecting cases that would advance broader goals regardless of immediate outcomes. The willingness to pursue litigation demonstrated commitment to principles and provided a model for how religious minorities could assert their rights. The question of whether the Satanic Temple's approach represented trolling or sincere religious expression remained contested. Critics, including some from other Satanic organizations, argued that the temple cynically exploited Satanic symbolism without genuine commitment to Satanic philosophy. Supporters countered that challenging hypocrisy through satire and using religious identity for political purposes did not preclude sincere belief. The organization itself embraced the ambiguity, recognizing that uncertainty about sincerity actually enhanced effectiveness by making critics uncomfortable and generating discussion. By the 2020s, the Satanic Temple had established itself as a significant force in debates about religion in public life. Its campaigns had influenced policy, generated national conversations, and provided a model for how religious pluralism could be weaponized against religious privilege. The organization demonstrated that Satanism could be more than individual practice or occult exploration, that it could serve as a vehicle for social change and a challenge to entrenched power. Whether this represented the future of Satanism or a unique moment reflecting specific political and cultural conditions remained to be seen, but the Satanic Temple had undeniably transformed what Satanism could be and what it could accomplish in contemporary society. The philosophy underlying modern Satanism, despite the diversity of organizations and approaches, shares certain core themes that distinguish it from mainstream religious traditions. Understanding these philosophical foundations reveals why Satanism appeals to certain individuals and how it functions as both a belief system and a form of identity. The Satanic worldview, whether atheistic or theistic, challenges fundamental assumptions about morality, human nature, and the proper relationship between individual and society. It offers an alternative to what its adherents see as the life-denying, authoritarian, and hypocritical aspects of conventional religion. Central to most Satanic philosophy is the valorization of individualism, where traditional religions emphasize community, submission to divine will, and subordination of personal desire to collective good. Satanism celebrates the autonomous individual pursuing their own interests and expressing their authentic nature. This individualism connects to the figure of Satan as the ultimate rebel, the being who refused submission even to God. The Satanic individual does not accept authority uncritically, does not sacrifice their well-being for abstract principles, and does not apologize for their existence or desires. This radical individualism appeals particularly to those who feel constrained by social expectations or oppressed by religious moralism. The rejection of guilt represents another fundamental principle. Christianity, in the Satanic critique, functions through instilling guilt about natural human impulses, particularly regarding sexuality and aggression. By defining these impulses as sinful, Christianity creates perpetual guilt that can only be resolved through submission to church authority and divine grace. Satanism rejects this framework entirely arguing that natural desires are not sinful, but simply expressions of human nature. Sexual pleasure, anger at those who harm you, pride in accomplishment, material comfort, all these become legitimate rather than shameful. This rejection of guilt offers liberation to those burdened by religious conditioning. Satanic approaches to morality vary, but generally reject the idea of universal moral laws derived from divine command. LaVey Satanism articulates a consequentialist ethics centered on what benefits the individual and their chosen community. Actions are judged by their results rather than conformity to abstract rules. Kindness toward those who deserve it, vengeance against those who cause harm, indifference toward those who do not matter. These situational responses replace universal commandments to love enemies and turn the other cheek. This approach appeals to those who find conventional morality naive or hypocritical, who observe that proclaimed moral principles are routinely violated in practice. Theistic Satanic traditions often incorporate different ethical frameworks, sometimes drawing on left-hand path philosophy that sees moral transgression as a tool for spiritual development. The intentional violation of taboos undertaken consciously and with understanding of consequences can serve to break psychological conditioning and transcend limiting beliefs. This is not license for random cruelty, but rather a sophisticated approach to using transgression for self-transformation. The ethics remains complex, distinguishing between transgression that liberates and violation that merely harms. The relationship between Satanism and science reveals another philosophical dimension. Most satanic organizations embrace scientific rationalism and reject supernatural explanations where natural ones suffice. Even theistic Satanists typically accept scientific findings about the natural world while maintaining belief in spiritual dimensions or forces not yet understood by science. This scientific orientation aligns Satanism with secular rather than religious worldviews in many respects, though the embrace of ritual and symbolism complicates simple categorization as merely secular philosophy. Satanic aesthetics merit consideration as more than superficial decoration. The deliberate embrace of darkness, horror imagery, and transgressive symbolism serves multiple functions. It repels those uncomfortable with such imagery, ensuring that members are not easily shocked or constrained by conventional taste. It provides rich, symbolic vocabulary for expressing ideas about human nature, desire, and power. It creates a distinct identity that marks practitioners as outside mainstream culture, and it offers genuine aesthetic pleasure to those drawn to Gothic, dark, or macabre artistic traditions. The influence of Satanism on popular culture, particularly music, has been substantial and reciprocal. Heavy metal music embraced satanic imagery from early days, with bands like Black Sabbath taking their name from occult terminology and incorporating diabolical themes into lyrics and album artwork. Later, more extreme subgenres, including black metal, made Satanism central to their identity and aesthetic. Some musicians were genuine practitioners or believers, while others employed satanic imagery primarily for shock value and rebellious branding. Regardless of sincerity, this musical association spread satanic iconography widely and influenced how younger generations encountered and understood Satanism. Black metal's relationship with Satanism proved particularly intense and sometimes violent. The Norwegian black metal scene of the early 1990s included church burnings and even murders connected to a militant anti-Christian ideology that some participants framed as satanic. These actions went far beyond anything advocated by organized satanic groups and were condemned by most Satanists as criminal extremism, having nothing to do with legitimate religious practice. However, the association damaged perceptions of Satanism and demonstrated dangers when transgressive philosophy attracted individuals prone to violence. The demographics of modern Satanism reveal interesting patterns. While precise numbers are difficult to determine, most evidence suggests Satanists are predominantly white, middle class, and educated, with higher proportions of LGBTQ individuals than the general population. Ages skew younger, though serious involvement often begins in late 20s or 30s after individuals have had time to question inherited beliefs and explore alternatives. The gender balance varies by organization, with LaVey and Satanism historically male-dominated, while the Satanic temple appears more gender-balanced. These demographics suggest Satanism appeals particularly to those with education and critical thinking skills who feel alienated from mainstream religion and culture. The global spread of Satanism has been uneven, with strongest presence in North America, Europe, and parts of South America. Cultural and legal contexts shape how Satanism manifests in different regions. In countries with strong Christian majorities but also religious freedom protections, Satanic organizations can operate openly. In nations with established churches or less religious freedom, Satanism remains underground or emerges primarily through music subcultures. The Internet has facilitated global communication among Satanists, allowing individuals in isolated areas to connect with broader communities and access information. Scholarly study of Satanism has increased substantially in recent decades, with academic researchers from religious studies, sociology, and anthropology examining Satanic movements and their cultural significance. This research has helped distinguish between actual Satanic practice and sensationalized media representations or Christian propaganda. Scholars have analyzed Satanism as new religious movement, as form of identity politics, as cultural resistance, and as expression of broader social changes. Academic attention has provided more nuanced understanding, while also legitimating Satanism as worthy of serious study rather than dismissal as mere deviance. The question of whether Satanism is growing or declining proves difficult to answer definitively. The Satanic temple's rapid expansion suggests increased interest, but this may reflect more the organization's political activism than embrace of Satanic identity per se. The Church of Satan claims steady membership, though releases no numbers. Many individuals identify with Satanic philosophy without joining organizations, making them invisible in membership statistics. Social media provides platforms for Satanic content that reaches vast audiences, but engagement metrics do not translate directly to committed practitioners. What seems clear is that Satanism has achieved unprecedented visibility and acceptance, at least in certain cultural contexts. Contemporary challenges facing Satanic movements include questions of internal coherence and external perception. The diversity of Satanic approaches, from LaVeyan atheism to theistic devil worship to political activism, makes it difficult to speak of Satanism as a unified phenomenon. This diversity enriches the tradition but also creates confusion about what Satanism actually is or stands for. Different organizations compete for legitimacy and membership, sometimes engaging in bitter disputes that undermine broader goals. The challenge of maintaining distinct identity while avoiding stereotypes associated with historical persecution or media sensationalism requires constant negotiation. The relationship between Satanism and other left-hand path or occult traditions remains complex. Some practitioners identify as both Satanist and practitioner of chaos magic, or as incorporating Satanic elements into eclectic magical practice. Others maintain strict boundaries, viewing Satanism as distinct from other occult approaches. The question of whether Satanism is primarily religious identity, magical practice, philosophical position, or political statement generates different answers from different practitioners and organizations. This multiplicity suggests Satanism functions differently for different people, meeting various needs and serving various purposes. Misconceptions about Satanism remain widespread, despite increased information availability. Many people still associate Satanism with criminal activity, child abuse, or animal sacrifice, confusing actual practice with either medieval fantasies or the false accusations of the Satanic Panic. Others dismiss Satanism as mere teenage rebellion or phase rather than serious religious commitment. The challenge of correcting these misconceptions while maintaining a genuinely transgressive identity creates tension. Satanists want to be understood accurately but not domesticated or made safe, to be recognized as legitimate but not respectable in conventional terms. The future trajectory of Satanism will likely continue to involve diversification and adaptation to changing cultural contexts. Younger generations encountering Satanism through social media develop understandings shaped by digital culture rather than the occult revival or counterculture of earlier eras. The increasing secularity of Western societies may make Satanism's atheistic or naturalistic approaches more appealing, while also reducing the transgressive power of explicitly religious Satanic identity. Conversely, backlash against secularism and reassertion of Christian nationalism in some regions may increase Satanism's relevance as form of resistance. Environmental concerns and social justice issues may influence future Satanic philosophy and practice. Some contemporary Satanists incorporate ecological awareness or intersectional analysis into their worldview, adapting traditional Satanic individualism to address collective challenges. Others resist such moves, viewing them as dilution of Satanic focus on the individual and compromise with leftist ideologies. These tensions between traditional Satanic emphasis on self-interest and emerging awareness of systemic issues will likely shape debates within Satanic communities. The question of what Satanism accomplishes, both for individuals and society, admits multiple answers. For practitioners, Satanism can provide a coherent philosophy aligned with their values, a community of like-minded individuals, rituals that address psychological and emotional needs, and an identity that expresses their sense of self. It offers permission to reject guilt, embrace pleasure, express anger, and live according to their own will rather than external dictates. These personal benefits should not be minimized, as they represent genuine improvements in well-being and self-actualization for many practitioners. Socially, Satanism serves various functions. It challenges religious privilege and hypocrisy, forcing examination of assumptions about morality and belief. It provides a language and framework for criticizing authoritarianism and life-denying ideology. It demonstrates that alternative approaches to meaning and value are possible outside traditional religious frameworks. It pushes boundaries of acceptable discourse and challenges comfort zones, forcing confrontation with ideas and symbols society prefers to avoid. Whether these social contributions are positive or negative depends on perspective, but they undeniably have impact. The dark path that Satan represents, whether understood literally as spiritual journey or metaphorically as psychological and philosophical stance, continues to attract those unwilling to accept conventional answers to existential questions. The adversary's eternal refusal to submit, to bow, to accept authority simply because it claims divine sanction resonates with those who value autonomy above security, authenticity above social approval, and individual will above collective conformity. This appeal will persist as long as individuals feel constrained by religious moralism, social convention, or political authority. The history traced through these many words reveals Satanism as deeply embedded in Western religious and cultural development, not a foreign intrusion but rather an internal shadow, the rejected elements returning to consciousness. From ancient conceptions of cosmic adversaries through medieval elaborations of demonic conspiracy, from romantic reimagining of Satan as tragic hero, through occult revival and emergence of organized satanic movements, to contemporary activism and diversified practice, the figure of Satan and those who identify with that figure have evolved alongside and in reaction to dominant religious and cultural currents. What began as Christianity's ultimate enemy has been claimed, inverted, and transformed into something far more complex than simple opposition. Modern Satanism encompasses atheists and theists, individualists and activists, magicians and philosophers, artists and provocateurs. It serves as religion, philosophy, identity, and political statement. It challenges, transgresses, liberates, and disturbs. It remains controversial, misunderstood, and powerful precisely because it touches deep anxieties about morality, authority, human nature, and the proper order of existence. The story of Satanism is ultimately a story about human freedom and the costs and possibilities of rejecting inherited frameworks. It asks what remains when traditional sources of meaning and value are discarded, whether authentic existence requires transgression of social norms, and whether the individual can or should stand against collective wisdom. These questions have no easy answers, but asking them, taking them seriously, exploring their implications through philosophy and practice, this work continues through those who walk the dark path, whatever form that path takes in their particular lives. The adversary's journey, begun in ancient texts and elaborated through centuries of fear and fascination, continues into an unknown future, adapting to new contexts while maintaining the essential core. The refusal to submit, the embrace of forbidden knowledge, and the assertion that humanity contains within itself the power to define its own nature and destiny, whether that leads to damnation or liberation, or perhaps to the recognition that these categories themselves are tools of control that must be transcended.